A rising heat, an ever-increasing flame, scalding, oppressive, smothering, stinging, a dark plume of temporary suffering in the quest of the high. Surely there must be a better way to smoke cannabis in 2023. Well, luckily for you, there is. It's called the freeze pipe. An Arctic breeze rushes in to soothe and smooth the way to your best smoking experience, because with the freeze pipe, you just take the food-safe glycerin chamber out, put it into the freezer section for a mere hour, after which it cools your smoke by over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know the conversion in Celsius. I'm just a guy who does esports. And then basically, at that point, you can just enjoy all the high of the cannabis smoking experience without all the horrible smokes burning you. It'll just be nice and smooth. It'll be a chill experience, won't it? Use the code LFN for 10% off at thefreezepipe.com for your order today. Thank you. Right. Obviously, we're back for counterpoints. And I thought an angle we could go with on this, Maniac, is, right, I've actually personally, I don't know about you, I've found the last 2 weeks really annoying, mate. Because on the one hand, like, I care about Counter-Strike. I'm trying to watch ESL Pro League and watch the matches there and see if people are doing well, and is Virtus.pro going to do an upset run, and can G2 win the event? All the storylines you want to look at. But instead, everyone else is obsessed with the release of CS2, right? But they're not really, Maniac. The worst thing is, they're not. All they're doing is every day just going like, tomorrow, today, is today the day? Is it? And then there's no actual like interesting discussion. Like, it's not like, you know, what could CS2 mean for esports, or what could we do differently, or what is it about CSGO that wasn't good enough or was really great and we need to make sure. There's none of that stuff. There's nothing like interesting around it. It's just this like, everyone's staying on. Essentially, the joke is, it feels like for 2 weeks, all everyone did was press F5 on like, yes, the Twitter account, you know, that one that's the official one of Valve, like Counter-Strike now it's called. It feels like all everyone did was just press F5 there. So the thing that annoyed me is, as the historian, I love it if we can have episodes where we talk about like the ending of a thing or something else coming. That's actually like my sort of, that's the grist for my mill. That's what I'm supposed to be loving, but no one's doing it right. So I thought we could do an episode, and this is purely off the cuff, so we're not going to it's not going to be some definitive episode, but I thought since me and Maniac were there for all of CSGO, and CSGO has now officially ended. Although even then, man, we've got to stop fucking blue balls in these fans, right? We already told them it was the last major, which we then did sort of conflict, like sound like the mass tournament. Then we were like, fucking Cologne though, it's the last real prestige event. And then we're like, Pro League's definitely the last. And the second CS2 was announced, it was like, and all tournaments will be running on CSGO still for the remaining few weeks. Like, so already that's sort of bullshit. But I thought what we could do is we could have an episode where let's look back on CSGO with so many different angles we could go from, but reminisce sort of the right way and show people, because the thing you always have to remember, this is actually a key concept. I don't know if I've explained it on this show before, but one thing I try to do for my content in general, Maniac, is I just noticed over the years, part of the reason esports is huge is that it's not like Twitter followers. You don't just build up a permanent follower base and they're just there, like that number. To me, it's more like waves. You get like a bunch of people come into the scene for 3 or 4 years, then maybe they just not, maybe their favorite player retires, or they just don't like CSGO anymore, or they grow up, maybe they get to 20 and they go to college or something. Then they go out of the scene, in comes a new 14-year-old who buys the skins and loves fucking Zero or whoever else is the popular player now. So what I always try to do roughly is I try to keep it as though like there's a 2 to 3 year memory for the average fan back in time. But anything beyond that, you can actually treat it almost as though they don't know it. Like for example, they've heard stories, dude, of like the Olaf boost or whatever. But unless they go and watch actually like that mini documentary Jason made or something, they're probably never going to know it. They're probably never going to go watch the game. And even if they do, they'll never go and look up, you know, what was the scene like, what was all like. So I thought there's so many different things we could do. So let's just start here, Maniac. It's not going to be an interview. It's going to be like an interesting episode where we just discuss old memories. But I thought one thing I could ask you at the beginning is this. Do you actually remember what your feelings were about CSGO? Like, because obviously you played a bit of 1.6, but then you were in the Source scene. So I always wondered, because if people don't know, Source was just such a smaller game that as far as I can tell, it did seem like most of the Source people swapped over. There was very few that like didn't even try CSGO. And as far as I can tell, the scene was like it basically wasn't it the same size as Source. It was just sort of like everyone in CS 1.6 thinks the scene got cut away because we had the huge events like the IEMs and stuff. Wasn't CSGO kind of like just a continuation of Source for you?
Yeah, listen, it's kind of a huge trip down memory lane. I struggle to imagine this was 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now, that CSGO came out. And the field was so different than now. Actually, I think it's a huge like mental exercise to just imagine how it was at the time, because we always have the tendency to think, it's exactly how it is now. You know, it's just a game transitioning. That's absolutely not true. It's as far as true as possible. When Counter-Strike Global Offensive came out, I think at least from the Source camp, I don't know about the 1.6 one because I had left probably a year and a half ago at that scene. I would say people were hoping that this was going to make it to the next level. I think people were hoping communities would come together. It would get bigger than what it was before because Source was, I mean, it had a few decent years, but then it was kind of fizzling out. Same with 1.6. I would say the hype was slowly dying out. The scene as well was getting smaller and smaller. Events were getting smaller. So people thought, okay, this is it. Like Go is what is going to actually bring us back. We're going to have competitions. ESWC was announced very quickly, and then DreamHack came around, DreamHack Valencia, and some of these big names. So people were excited about it. That's one side of it. The other side of it was the game was really bad at the very beginning. The game was extremely bad. And I think people pushed through because of the hope of what it could potentially become. I think this was the case for me. I understood that from the very beginning, the first few months were really atrocious from like a sensitive perspective, just movement, aim, and all that kind of stuff. But very quickly, I think the promise of more events, more regular events, a bigger scene, and also sort of the mini hype and rivalry between 1.6 and Source, it was kind of fueling. And for me, that's what helped me push through the first few months. And after that, the game got obviously better, and we started the crazy adventure that we're on now, 10 years later.
Yeah, one thing I would say, as you would like describing it, that I was remembering is people are going to think that, like, for example, because if people actually have heard, I mean, I know Zonic himself even jokingly self-referenced it, is like, because people know there's that classic stuff that's documented, which is at the end of 1.6 and early CSGO. Because if people don't know, actually those games weren't directly a sequel to another. Like, those coexisted. So if people don't know, one thing actually a lot of people often don't know, I've often explained, one of the reasons it's forgotten as to why NiP was so dominant is also because the best 1.6 teams didn't swap over. They just kept playing 1.6 for like 6 months more. NAVI, Fnatic, the Poles, ESC, or whatever they were called. I can't remember if they were ESC at the time. Whoever they were, the top 3 teams basically just stayed in CS 1.6 for like 6 months more. And so when we actually did have this swap over, you'd had already an insane amount of negativity towards CSGO from the 1.6 players. So people like, I know the Poles, I think either Taz or Neo had said something after they played some show match against SK, who were Forest and Get Right, etc. before. I know that Zonic obviously famously said like CSGO will never be as big as 1.6. I think HLTV, the website, famously at the time sort of like held off and was more in like the 1.6 camp. People actually at the time, if you don't know, this will be the weird analogy, people almost thought there was a chance we could make it like CGS, and because like the other game was out but we didn't like it, we could like force 1.6 to still be the game, if you know what I mean, which is what happened during CGS, and people don't know, because their license was for Source. Basically, just North Americans played it in Source in their league, and then in Europe we just kept playing 1.6 and no one swapped over except like a few people in the UK scene and whatnot. So I think at the time, actually, people will forget how much negativity there was, but I actually don't think like the same sorts of doom and gloom need to exist for CS2, because what people are forgetting is like, one, that game was drastically different. Like if anyone's played CS2, I said this from the beginning, right? The annoying thing to me is like side stuff, like, you know, does the hit reg work properly? Is the spray like slightly laggy at some point? But in general, like the mechanics are the same. Like, I mean, you could already see this when you saw anyone streaming it. Like if you saw NiKo play it or Simple play it, it's like, that's just fucking CSGO, but like different graphics and slightly different engine. Like it clearly isn't that crazy, like a gap anywhere. Like you see people who are good, and people who sucked aren't magically 4 times better because it's a new game, are they? Like they still suck at CS. So there's that. And then also, we don't have any of those limiting factors from before. Like, for example, now there isn't even a game to stay and play, so no one's staying back. Like, you essentially just retire from playing as a pro now, or you just play CS2. And as far as I can tell, this is also why I did sort of try to downplay the hype that, like, you know, all the old pros who were like, I might come back for CS2. It's like, bro, it is CS2 now, so are you back? Does anyone offer you? No, exactly, because the point is, all the factors that would make you get picked up apply now when it was CSGO, didn't they? Like, that never really worked. They were almost making it like before, where it's like, the game's so different, you know, well, I'm 4 times better, what the hell? I fucked around, I'm the best player in the world without even practicing. It's like, they actually believe, like, some naive fan that could happen. So that isn't the case anyway. We've already got all the players. But that's actually a massive positive, because even though a fan might want the novelty of seeing some old legend come back, the good news about CS2 is, all the CSGO pros are here. They are playing from day one of it officially being out on like limited beta or whatever, and they are trying to be pros at it. The worst thing about CSGO was knowing that like half the pros, especially the 1.6 pros, hate the fucking game, think that the scene is dying and is never going to be big, and as a result, the feeling almost was like, when do they each quit? Like when Trace quit, people might know one of the most famous examples is Trace from Fnatic quit, and he was so skilled a player, he almost certainly, I feel like if he kept playing, one day would be good at the game, right? I don't blame him though. If you go and look when he quit, like he quit when the tournaments were shit. He quit when like your first teams were coming up. You know the ones in 2013 where like the best tournament, no joke, was like ESWC or those like shitty ESL ones that were like EMS inside the studio. Though you remember it was just like those StarCraft events he used to run. It was just like inside a little studio with a tiny crowd of like I'd say like dude, not even 100 people, maybe like 60 people. You remember how small that studio was? That was the biggest CS:GO was at the time. Like, that was when Nip was winning all these events, guys. They're not in stadiums with like adoring fans like, oh my god, it's like that. It's like, you know, you just play him in a match, you shake the hand, but you can't beat him again, and then like go to another small LAN or studio LAN. So at the time, like their circuit was way smaller. Also, people might not know, ESL famously said that we are putting CS into the major series. It's not in Intel Extreme Masters, which is where you get the kind of Vitzes and the huge LAN events. They didn't do that. Like their version of a Cologne event wasn't IEM Cologne. It was this little EMS Cologne in just this studio that they had at the time, the old ESL offices. So I would just say this, like the circuit at the time, Counter-Strike's place in esports was in trouble back then. Most people didn't like the game. And by the way, and then thirdly, the circuit just wasn't ready yet. Like people weren't ready to put it back to the number one. So all the factors that would make it cool sort of didn't exist. And I'll finally say this as like a wrap-up thing. I'll throw it back, which is this. The good news about this version of the game, CS2 compared to CSGO, is like I said about some of the pros I was just waiting to retire, right? You can do this. This is actually the heart, in my opinion, the real like lifeblood of esports is the idea that you like the game so much. You can put up with times when you don't make a salary or the events is shit or the game has problems. You put up with it because you just love the game. It's your craft. It's your spot. If people actually hate the game, like if I know some guy who's like the best AWP in 1.6 and he hates the AWP in CSGO or he thinks like the fucking Deagle's never has got... This guy, he's not going to put up with the scene being shit or lower, or he's not going to go through the hard times and like, you know, pull together everyone. He's just going to quit or he's going to mourn or he's going to make it bad. So I actually think CS2 has, even though everyone's panicking, I think it has a way better chance to be good, like very quickly. Think about it, dude. Right out the gate, in theory, as soon as they swap, we're going to have all the big LAN events. We're going to have all the giant kind of Vitzes, Cologne, a major. We're going to, by the way, how sick is that? We start the game with a fucking major. Like, let's say today, we're counting it like officially now. CS2 started, 3 days ago or something, right? Dude, the first majors within less than a year. That's good. That's actually good. It gives time to work out all the... Because there's the other thing people might not know. In a fucked up way, I don't want there to be a major immediately. Like I've always said, it does suck for Nip, because Nip definitely would have won one of those early majors. But at the same time, if there'd have been like a major right at the beginning, like say there was a major like December 2012 minute, that would have been the shittest major ever. And the result would be the least, you know, meaningful. Like in some ways, it is better to have like time to sort of like decompress. So actually, if people don't know, I'm not sort of down on the scene. Like I think the game might have problems that need to be fixed, but I actually think the circuit has an amazing chance to just start immediately. We basically begun, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I share absolutely no doubt or concern about the state of the esport. Like zero. I have no doubt. For me, it's just going to be, we're going to continue on the dynamics that CSGO created, and hopefully in a better game, visually more interesting, more attractive to newer audience. That's how I see it. Like I have no doubt about it. And just to bounce on your point as well, like we had to wait probably, let's say, a year to a year and a half for CSGO to really take off, as in major circuit to be established, huge tournaments to kind of start having the notoriety. I mean, people might not know it, but the first major I played, which was in Cologne, was in Gamescom. We were not in Lanxess. We were behind Black Drapes, and we had a few hundred people watching, and that was it. It was only 2015 where Lanxess came around. Spodek was actually one of the first.
By the way, for anyone who doesn't understand what he says there, the key different distinction to make here is, nowadays, obviously an event is in its own stadium, and it's just that event. You're just there for League of Legends World Championship. But what you're talking about is back in the days when it's like you're just part of like a stage of the giant Gamescom event, right? You're not even your own event, right? In this scenario, like you say, you're just like a curtain, like, hey, private games going around here. Like it's so much smaller than now.
No, it absolutely was. Gamescom, we were just part of the expo.
Yes.
And there were hundreds, thousands of other people here doing something completely unrelated to Counter-Strike. And then people would come in, and obviously in Germany, they have a very restrictive approach to Counter-Strike, so kids could not come in without the parents.
Oh yeah, they have all the laws.
It was all blocked in, exactly. And then you had obviously EMS1 Katowice and Spodek, but we were, I would say, a quarter of the audience. A quarter of the stage was for us. The other one was StarCraft 2, probably.
Oh yes, people forget this. They ran multiple games there too, right? Yeah,
exactly. And they had these other games had the bigger stage. We had a smaller stage. So this was just the beginning of it. So obviously we're in a completely different scenario here for CS2. But funnily enough, this is also why I've been a little bit more annoyed by the state of the game at the very beginning. And that's the only thing that kind of bothers me, is that people who use the argument of, oh, but remember when CSGO came out, It was a bit complicated at the beginning. It took some time.
Sure.
We had to fix it. And I understand that. I know I've played the game, but the stakes are different now. As you say, the stakes are different. There's IEM Sydney coming around the corner. Some teams are going to roll up in IEM Sydney, having played 6 to 7 prac days. And then I completely agree with you. Thank God the major is a bit further away, because I don't want to have to play a janky whatever major where people have no idea what mechanics they can use in the game and the results have no meaning. We are skipping straight through this year and a half of nothing as a CSGO for CS2, where the circuit is immediately here. We are continuing the professional calendar with everything that comes with it. Like history will not just forget that period. We're going to, from the very beginning, look at who is winning, who is losing. Contracts are going to be decided. People are going to be either cut or extended, depending on their results. There's a whole lot more riding on it. So that was the one thing that I would have maybe been more in favor of, a longer open beta period where we can try a little bit and fix it. Well, now we're into it. So you know what? That doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter. We're into CS2, and it's going to be a race, a sprint at the very beginning for who can adapt the fastest. And then after a few months, it's going to probably stabilize a little bit, and a true hierarchy is going to show up. The game is in a very good place, which is why it should also deliver in a good quality from the very beginning. We don't have 18 months of just goofing around and playing whatever tournament. This is the real calendar has started. In fact, it's never stopped.
Right, obviously, there's so many things we can contrast as well. So the other thing is, people might know Maniac. I always think they set this up wrong as well, right? The actual number 87 and 0, the streak that Nip had, I think always ruins like early CSGO history, because I always try to tell people, I know it sounds like a lot, like, holy shit, 87. But like, first of all, like the first tournament in that was like a small like Swedish one called like Steel Series CSGO, something with like teams that you've never heard of, and like, I think like maybe Pronax and a couple like RDL or a few Swedish players played, but like a bunch of them are amateurs. And then also, because they were never losing, this is the key thing to understand, because they never lost, that meant actually 87 and 0 only took something like, I'm going to say like 7 months or something. I think it was until, I think they lost it in April of 2013, and the game obviously began like, let's say like August 2012. So it was actually like, even though that sounds like, yeah, it's a long period of time, yeah, it is to be undefeated. But what people don't know is like, they were still the easy #1 team for like 6 more months after that. Like, it actually was even more dominant than people realize. And at the time, the crazy thing is, it wasn't even just this, like the funny thing is, people didn't really obsess about the number until it got close to the 87, I remember. Like, maybe when it was like, I'm going to say like 60 something, people started like counting the number and going, is anyone ever going to beat them? At the time, though, this is what people don't realize is, people always look back on history, Maniac, and they see what happened, and they just accept it like a story, like, oh, it was always going to go that way. Like, the reason why no one obsessed about 87 and 0 is, if you ever watched back then, they weren't just wrecking everyone. Like, when they played very games, it was close a million times. And there was loads of teams, by the way, had like 16-13 and 16-14 maps against them that they lost. Like, at the time, the actual sense was just, like, when are they going to lose? Like, it's obviously inevitable you're going to lose eventually. Not only when are you going to lose, but actually at the time, it actually did sort of fuck the narrative up that very games just never beat them, because it is reminiscent of the only other one is obviously Team Liquid against Astralis, where, yeah, it felt like every single time it mattered in 2018. Obviously, you remember what happened in 2019, but 2018, every time it mattered, Astralis did beat them. Like, it just didn't matter, and it meant that it did sort of fuck the narrative up, because on the one hand, yeah, it made Astralis the greatest, like, it made Nip fucking goated, but at the same time, like, the whole scene would have been so awesome if even once or twice that like underdog team took the win, or took like, like won one of these 16-14 ones. Or, like, that's the other thing. It was the fact also people weren't even making it like 3 maps. So even when you did like 2 16-14s, they still won 2-0. So it felt like they were dominant. So I don't know if people remember how crazy that early period was. Like, this was like the first basically like whole year of the game. Basically, like, it just felt like it was just Nip's kingdom, right?
So I would say what was the most intriguing and enticing, like for people who like to dive back into history as well, is specifically in the very games NIP matchup, with famously usually happened in quarter or semi or grand final of these events in CSGO, have a look at the score of the first map and the score of the second, because it was always the same story. It was very games getting very close to winning that map, that one map that was eluding them for now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 series, getting to 14-16, getting to 13-16, sort of that numbers. Of course, towards the very end, you'd had a clutch that went NIP's way, because Get Right was the first to do it almost to perfection at the time, and they had players who could step up in big moments. Forrest would always just destroy you straight up and at round number 28 or something like that. And then after that, very games would get destroyed. I promise you, there are at least 4 to 5 series that have the exact same pattern, which is a 14-16 and then a 16-2, 16-3, 16-1. It doesn't even matter, because I think very games they kind of had this like learned helplessness where they started believing that they would never actually beat them. And so when you had that first map that just slipped through your fingers, a part of them thought, well, fuck it, that's going to be the same. Like, we're about to get destroyed. And NIP were snowballing in terms of, I guess, confidence. And that in itself made a huge difference. And I think, honestly, the whole like Very Games core doesn't really hold a big place in the history of CSGO. And that's probably because of that number. Like, people don't really grade them or rate them so high in the beginning of CSGO. Like, yeah, cool, they were a good team for a while, and then they created Titan, which famously became a catastrophe, maybe here and there a trophy, but that was it. Merely a disappointing project for the French scene who never really carried around. But actually, that core, like Very Games and then Titan, had a bunch of very, very high finishes in a whole lot of tournaments. They were the second best team in the world for me for quite a while. But because of this NIP 87-0, that's basically all we remember. I don't think a whole lot of people remember even the lineup that Very Games had at the time when they were playing them.
There's obviously a bunch of players as well I want to like talk a little bit about, reminisce on, because while we're on the topic of this French scene, Maniac, one thing I have to bring up is, even though I was there, so I know why at the time there was like a logic and things sort of made sense. Like when you look back now, it does look so fucking stupid that France only has 2 majors ever, and then basically like one was with Sharks and one was with Kenny S. Like, if you go back in time, isn't the first thing you do just have Shocks and Kenny S just play together from the beginning? You know what I mean? Like, it feels like such a waste, bro, because like in any other scene, like you almost would never have this. Like the joke is like the only comparison I can sort of give is like it's a bit like that weird thing that Heroic has now, where even though Heroic's like slipping off, somehow it's not on the table to like get Blame F or Device. You know what I mean? You just think like, but bro, they did this as well. Like, why don't you just go get them today? We'll, we're right back in the mix. But it just doesn't happen, right? But that's at least like, there's the logic of, oh, maybe there's like business stuff. Like this is back when the scene was tiny. Like back then, it was like the real old school Counter-Strike where you just pick someone up if they want to join. That's it. Like they don't have a choice. Like even back then, even if them all comes, yeah, but we've got a contract. It's like, oh, here's 10Ks. Fuck off. You know what I mean? Like it's not really like a thing. They can't really like football. Like we're not letting them go. Like it's not a big enough offer. Like it's not like that. So back then, like the craziest thing is it would have been incredibly easy. So as far as I know, Maniac, as an outsider, it's just some stupid shit like here's the one thing I don't get, mate. I get the idea of like, if you look at their dynamic, Shocks is more the person who's like a bit of an instigator. That's why if you notice, he always leaves the team or gets kicked. And then Kenny S is just the guy who just wants to play CS, so he just comes in and joins. But what do you actually think there was was there some like unspoken of rivalry between them two? Because they all claim there isn't. But again, I would have thought even they would sort of one day have met in a bar and be like, wait a minute, I'm losing the tournament. You're losing. Why don't we just, you're even a rifler, I'm a fucking awful. Like, there's not even any overlap. Like, to me, it's crazy these players didn't just play together for 10 years, Maniac. I think it's crazy.
I agree with you. In retrospect, I don't really understand what
it's wild, isn't it? Like France should have like 5 majors or something, mate.
I will say I cannot really speak to like an unspoken rivalry between the two because I'm not aware of it. Like first-hand experience, I haven't really experienced that. What I do know is that we have to put everything in context. And then in 2013, 2014, maybe even beginning of 2015, we are very far from the level of professionalism we have now.
Oh, for sure,
Right now, you have teams who are run as like a knit-type project, and you are optimizing whatever it is you can do. And if people are not friends, then tough luck. You're going to work together. If you don't, you're going to lose your contract. And that's just it. You walk the line, you get better, or you get kicked. At the time, I think, first of all, players were holding a much greater power over where the team was going. And this was the 2013, 2014 rule, at least in French Counter-Strike. It could have been different in other countries. But in France, some players held the power over what the hell was happening. And it was their opinion, and it was their say that was going first, and not the coach, not the general manager, not the CEO of the org. If you wanted a player, then that came with his opinion, and you trusted him. And I think this lasted for a very long time, probably as a sort of a side effect of the success that the French scene had in different games. So some players came up, a la Existence, for example, whenever what he would say would be gospel. Right? For a long time, if he had an opinion, that was it. You were not going to challenge it. That was his project. And then, so that was step one. So I think some players at the time probably believed that this was better to keep them apart, because also, that's another point, like we had shitty attitudes at the time. Like, you think we talk about how simple could have been a shit kid when he started going? He wasn't the only one. Kenyas was horrible to play with at times. Like, he was actually, he was, this funny graph, which is like, was it like hotness and craziness, and you have to be as hot as you are crazy, so it works. Kenyas was straight in sort of that narrative. Like, he was so incredibly gifted and talented and impactful that you would put up with whatever crazy spiel he would go through in a game, or before a game, or after a map, or during an event. And I think Shocks was also at times in the middle of some trouble that was happening in teams, that people thought, you know what, if these two can come together, like we're not like no one wants to be in charge of a project that is actually going to have these two potentially clashing and going to an actual nuclear fission. Like no one thinks we're going to be able to handle it because, first of all, we were kids. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I was sitting here like an old bearded man and I knew all the truth to the world. Absolutely not. I was out there drinking like an idiot when there would be a game day the next day. So I did the same mistakes. We were kids and we had no idea of the magnitude of what was happening as we were living it. We were just kind of playing Counter-Strike.
More like rock and roll vibe, right?
Sort of, and now obviously what we do is we're in 2023. We know all that's on the line, so we look back at this and we're like, oh, what the fuck? Why did they not do this? Like, this would have been so incredible. They could have had many majors. At the time, we had no idea there would ever be a moment where 19 majors were played. It was a major, and then, oh, there's another one major. Wow, that's great. Wow, a third major. That's crazy. Where are we going with this? Stickers money. Woo! We had a completely different vision, and not a lot of people were ready to put the W above everything, and I include myself in that category. I don't think I had the long teeth. And so that's probably one of the reasons why the French scene kind of shot itself in the foot. Because, with the talent that we had, I think there could have been many more titles than what actually turned out to be.
By the way, on that exact topic as well, it's funny because back then, it's a joke because I can even give the perfect reference point. Essentially, what I do with MSL now in LXEB, where everyone's like, we shut the fuck up about them, it's over, just get over it already. That's what I did with Existence famously for many, many, many years, right? And people don't get it, especially if they're not from Source, because they don't understand, like, the reason this character was so fascinating and almost like some Shakespearean tragedy, where like Othello or some shit, where like they could have done so many great things, but they get betrayed by the wrong person. In the wrong, all that sort of jazz, is because here's the analogy I would give people. If everyone remembers, like 4 or 5 years ago in football, that player for Chelsea was fucking unbelievable, Eden Hazard, the Belgian player, right? And everyone was fucking loving him because at the time the game had just been dominated by Messi and Ronaldo for so many years that like it was cool that there was like, wow, there's another player who could like be on that sort of level and do like amazing shit in the game. But the problem is, if people know, famously, I think it was a mixture of like injuries and because he went to Real Madrid or something, like his game just completely went off the boil. And was never that great again, essentially. And people did the same thing for years, even to this day, technically. Like, people want him to go back to Chelsea now and hope it, like, magically, like, Cargo Cult reboot his career, and it'll all be like, like some fucking, oh, it's all going to be great now, he's back or whatever, which probably won't happen if he wasn't that good the last few years. So essentially, like, the reason why I get why people get obsessed, though, is because the analogy I'm giving there is, you want someone who the actual ceiling on what they could do, like, if they got it all together, is ideally the top. It's to be the absolute best, is to do everything to get. If people don't know, Existence was that guy back then. Like, if you look back at the scene back then, when you have like Fnatic's winning championships, like NIP's one of the best Virtus.pros around, Carrigan and Astralis are coming up, like, Existence actually, for real, was a contender with any of the other IGLs. And at the time also, you had a mad impact on the game. Like, there was an era where they had like a bit of like Existence style tactics and people doing stuff from Sport and classic CS, That wasn't just like only NIP loose style CS. We definitely had the mixture in the game. So I always feel like people don't realize that isn't just some like, oh, it's an old famous guy, wasn't that good. It's like, first of all, it's so infuriating. Like, no one will ever really know why. Why did he fail just those majors? Because if people don't know, it would pretty much just be the majors. Like, every other tournament was just normal. And then he would go to a major and it was like reverse Superman. It's like he turns into Clark Kent. Like, what the fuck? And so no one ever understood. It was really mysterious why it kept happening. In fact, the joke is people started that whole thing that he was choking pretty early on. They did it like 2 or 3 majors in. So at the time, I remember him being like, come on, it's only a couple of tournaments. But by the end, it became like self-fulfilling. Like, even he believed it by the end. Everyone thought he was just choking by the end. So what do you think on this topic? Because some people think I'm just going too far with it. But you see why I give the MSL analogy? Like, when MSL was right and he had his right teams, it really made CS interesting. Like, there was another player with a totally distinct style who was going to have his own chances to go to the top. Like, to me, Existence is one like the big what-ifs in CSGO. It could have been so different if he'd ever had his head dialed in at these majors.
Yeah, listen, that's possible. When we joined Titan, so that is 2014, it's probably Q3 of 2014, as Cali, Apex, and we joined KNS and Existence. I already knew him for a few years, but I hadn't played with him. So this is where I really got to know the guy and how he was thinking. And at the time, it was already sort of, the monster had already sort of formed in the back of its head that majors were something that were gonna bring him trouble forever. Like, right. I feel like this was already a thing, when you talk to someone and they already ahead of time talk about how they fucked up at majors, and this time around, this lineup, that's the moment, it's finally gonna happen. I could already see that there was the seed of the doubt was already firmly planted. I never really knew exactly how it started. I know my hypothesis has always been that after the first one, where they famously lose to NIP in Stockholm, right? Oh wait, no, Jönköping at the time, not Stockholm, Jönköping. I think after that, they might have made the mistake of looking ahead a little bit further or too far in the tournament when they were playing this group stage, thinking about, how we're going to get to quarter, to semi, to final this time, guys. We really have to win this. Because I don't know if you remember, I think you probably remember this, when Titan was put together, the branding was very ambitious. I thought this was very dangerous. They got put together with the very explicit goal to be number one. Like there was no messing around. Like, oh yeah, we think we're gonna be a great team. No, like this organization is gonna be the best team in the world. Which obviously what's intended is that they're gonna push an IP off the podium. They're gonna actually win everything. So they put a tremendous amount of pressure on their shoulders, whether it's their decision or the management or whoever was doing social. I don't know, but there was a very strict line that they were walking in terms of media. And then I remember watching them fall apart in moments and precisely in group stage of events where probably they didn't expect that level of competition, that level of competition that would come to their way. And I don't think they were equipped to deal with that. And once you lose once, twice, then suddenly it starts shaping to be its own person. Like that major actually becomes a person psychologically in your mind. You're like, holy shit. I also don't think people realize how dicey the group stage format of majors were.
Oh, they were wild. These were BO1s back then. Yeah, exactly.
I need to take just a minute for people to understand. So first of all, we were mostly playing what we used to call GSL, so which is winner bracket, loser bracket, best of one all the way. So you would win 2 games, you would make it through to the major playoffs, you would lose 2 games, you would be out. And when I say 2 games, I mean 2 maps, best of one.
Yep.
We also had that thing for the longest time that legends would be guaranteed a spot at the next major, which was huge. Like, it was absolutely huge.
Yes.
Basically, one best of one. Let's just say you were playing the decider game of a major. Winning that decider game in the group stage would guarantee you to be already present in the next major. And so when the stickers came around, and you can imagine what kind of impact it had on people's life in general, this is the kind of pressure that we were operating under. I'm not saying that the pros today have it easy. It's not what I'm saying. But it was much more cutthroat and, to be honest, quite stupid what we were doing at the time.
Well, so I mean, sorry, just to clarify for a fan who doesn't get what you're saying there, like the difference now is, it's still a big deal if you do like well at a major now, but the difference is you still have an awesome salary and a great career and the rest of your career is going on. Like back then, like getting that sticker money, that's like life and death for some of these teams and players.
Yeah. It changes a lot. And also in terms of format, you have to imagine now most majors have a Swiss format, which is basically 2 best of one. And as soon as you start being at risk of being eliminated or in a chance of qualifying, then you play a best of 3. So you could potentially save yourself with 3 best of 3s back to back, and you can earn your way back to the legend stage of a major. That wasn't the case before. First of all, we didn't have a new challenger stage. It was 16 teams make the major. That is it. And when you were in the 16 teams, then you were playing that best of one group. So I think a whole lot of disappointments happened through these best of ones. And the ones that I experienced with Existence were all the same. It happened twice that we didn't make it through the group stage with him, which was 1 game very tight against a huge favorite that we should have won and we lose. And then after this, the floodgate, just basically the dam just breaks. And then the second game is shadow of yourself. You get absolutely destroyed by whoever is in front of you. I even lost to Penta, which was Crystal at the time.
Indeed.
German majority lineup. And when I say lose, I say 16-5 on cash. They walked over us. And this was just after we lost to NV in an overtime game, which was one of the best teams in the world at the time. So these were very pressured matchups. And I think for Existence, probably he started doubting himself and doubting his own ability to lead in these moments. And that's basically how it fizzled out. And then you know what it is as a leader. Once you lose trust in yourself, very quickly your players start to realize that, and they start thinking, well, what the hell? Like, if this guy doesn't believe in what he's doing right now, then I can do it better than him. Like, what the fuck? Why am I following this guy? Like, I know how to do it. And he was surrounded, which was very complicated for him because he was surrounded by people who were amongst the very best in CSGO. And these very best people were not having success. You're talking Shocks. It's top 5 HLTV, I think probably back-to-back. NBK as well in the top 10. Like, huge fraggers, huge skill machines. And then here he is, not making out a group stage at majors. And that's just not acceptable for anybody, for him, for his teammates, for the community. And he kind of fell in a hole of lack of trust, I would say.
The funny thing is, I don't think fans understand how often that happens. Like, basically, This is why when you have a window, like a team and an opportunity where you're like good enough and you have the right squad and, you know, it's the right opposition that you can beat and the right map pool and everything that you need to go your way. It's why you have to use that window and actually win then. You can't just wait like 4 years because, quite frankly, almost every single in-game, in fact, I might even say it might be every single in-game leader, minute. Eventually, every single in-game leader has either a star or a team that's just sick of his voice and they don't want to hear it anymore and they want to play with someone else. Like, I can tell you everyone, spoiler, there's a reason Fnatic continued without Pronax, guys. I'm not going to speak on their behalf, but put it this way, they didn't think he was that good. I'll give you one that'll probably shock you right now. As far as I know, I don't think Forrest actually thinks Khan's all that good. I think he thought he was overrated a bit. I think he actually wanted to go separate ways in his career. Spoiler, I imagine some of them, who knows if they'll ever say this, I imagine some of the Astralis guys think there was life beyond Glaive and, you know, maybe there's a different way to play CS. Like, to a fan, you just think these guys are the best, you know. But I can tell you, the same thing is what happened with Kerrigan, like 2 or 3 times in his career, Maniac. Like, what would happen is, it's like exactly as you say it, because these are really reflective guys we're talking about. These aren't just like look, the one thing I'll say is a positive for Happy is because he was kind of like blinkered and he only thought his way was the way. That meant that essentially he didn't have to second guess himself, though. He just do what he did, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So the problem these guys had is they're so reflective, like you say, they would get in their own head before it's even really happened yet. Like, I've heard the same thing with Kerrigan in both FaZe and the Astralis line. I heard what happened was eventually, like, I think it usually spawned with those things, where like something like, you know, which map do we play as like our 4th map or whatever, and then he would be like, well, I think this one, and then they'd lose a few times, and the team would be like, no, we don't think that, we should play this other map that you're not as good. And then it's one of those ones where, because you then second guess it, oh, maybe I should do what they say, and then eventually like they just take over for everything, and then or they replace you with someone else. So that's not actually as shocking as people realize it. When you hear that, it doesn't mean that these players were shit. Spoil almost every in-game leader ever, like I say, eventually. Same thing in football, by the way. Eventually, even the greatest manager, if he's not winning all the time now, you have to replace him. Like, you just have to bring in a new voice, don't you? People, there's only so long you can listen to one guy.
Definitely, but the problem is, and I think this is probably one of the most unique aspects of being an IGL compared to other players, which obviously don't have an easy life, but let's just say that for IGLs specifically, once you start doubting, there's no way back. There's pretty much no way back. You either have some very solid teammates around you that help you build that confidence back up, and then together you sort of rise again, which is sort of the romanticized way, and I'm not exactly sure that happened many times in history. But if you start doubting whatever it is you want to do, you're basically, it's a lose-lose scenario, because you either go with what you think it is, but there's a chance you're not going to do it as clean, as right, as confident as you would have done it, because you're starting to think about, oh, but what if this strategy doesn't work? Like, oh, maybe my teammate is right. Maybe we should play a little bit slow. So I'm going to maybe moderate a little bit, and I'm going to mitigate what is it that I want to do. So you end up with like a fake version of what was your first idea, which doesn't work, and then you look like an idiot. Or you straight up go with someone else's idea, and you don't have any ownership of what's happening. And then you're losing. You're still the face of the loss. You're still the IGL that's losing with that game, but you're not playing your game. And this is equally dangerous as a leader. I would argue this is what happened to NAVI. And this is a bad thing as a leader. It's unacceptable as a leader to have your powers being taken away from you by your team, and then just being a standing head here and heading into the losses and just say, listen, I had nothing to say. Then don't be a leader. Yes. Just do not be a leader in that. If you're not going to stand up for the playstyle that you're playing, for the Counter-Strike that you're playing, and the decisions that you're making, you're not supposed to be a leader. Spoiler alert, not everyone is equipped to do that. And this is why, famously in Counter-Strike, some strong personalities have tried to be IGLs, and not everyone has that success. And this is why we are sometimes impressed with how Apex has actually turned out, because we thought it wouldn't work. We thought it was one of these scenarios where he'd never really have the shoulder to stomach that kind of pressure. It's going to crumble. And actually, no, it turned out great. So if you are a leader and you are not ready to stand up for what you believe is the right way to go, there's no positive issue. It's just a matter of delaying when things are going to go to hell. Either your players are going to turn on you, or you're going to just basically cannibalize yourself in doubt. And that has happened to more than one leader in the history of CS.
Oh, I'll tell everyone, and what a recent example that you'll know if you've been following the recent scene, I would say, is Nitro and Team Liquid. Lurpus actually called this. If people don't know, I really do get sick of that, mate, is where like it's the like modern kids, these nephews who just don't know people, and then they act like you're a nobody. It's like, why are you going to act like Lurpus is nobody? You know, he was like a top in-game leader in 1.6 for like a fucking half a decade or something. If people don't know, he even literally was headhunted and went and played in the American Evil Geniuses at a time when nobody went to other countries and was like we didn't have international teams back then. Like, people act like this guy is just like fucking a Twitter head. Like, he was actually like a mega expert about the game. So anyway, one thing he pointed out ages ago was when they had that storyline where it was like that whole thing of like, Nitro and Yekindar, where it was like, oh, Nitro turned up late to the boot camp, so, we're just going to have Yekindar call on, like, a few of the maps. He called it then, dude. He was just like, this is just the end of Nitro's the IGL. Like, this is just them, literally, whether he knows it or not, transitioning him out. And spoiler, once you give up a few maps like that, like, you never get him back, mate. Like, he's just going to keep doing that, and then what he's going to do is he's going to, maybe I take, Mirage as well, and then eventually you haven't got any maps left. Or even worse, they cock you totally. This has happened a few times with IGLs I won't mention. And at the end, you're still listed as IGL, but you do, like, one map or something like that, or you just do like T-side on one map or some shit like that, and they just like in name let you be the IGL. Like, that is the death. Like, when that happens, you can see it coming. Right, here's one thing I want to ask you about, because it's slightly controversial, but you're a big boy, you know how to talk your way around these things. So here's the topic that no one ever talks about, Maniac, which is one of the reasons I told you I had an idea to do this episode. This is one of the things I want to ask you about, actually, which is, as the esports historian, I do hate that people try to just like memory hole stuff. They just get something and go, that never happened, and then they just like delete it, and then they never address it, and they think if you never talk about it, then it never happened, and you don't even have to worry about, out of sight, out of mind, as we say in English. And so I always tell people, even though the saying in English is, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like, once something momentous happens, you can't undo it. Like, an obvious example would be like, let's say like a sex scandal of like some huge celebrity or a politician. Once that happens, even if you're popular, even if your career succeeds, you'll never be thought of the same as that again. Like, once that information's in the world, it can't like be unknown. Everyone can't collectively go, look, should we all just agree to forget that happened, right? You don't do that in general. But what's mad is, when this whole thing with like people getting all those clips of Flusher, and I'll already add a piece of info already that shows where the story goes amiss. It isn't just Flusher. It wasn't Flusher. It was Flusher had the most clips. Then there was some clips even of Olafmeister. Dude, I think even Crims had a couple of like, clips where people claimed he won like a 1v2 and, did he aim key on the guy behind the box before he shot him? There was like a whole bunch, 2 or 3 players in this team. And admittedly, it wasn't Pronax, surprisingly. The players that you'd expect. And basically, the vibe, a lot of the attention was that like Flusher cheated or whatever. But at the time, people are going to know, fans were going crazy on HLTV. Fans on Reddit, is this legit? Is it not? Because obviously as well, the other timing thing is just before this, Kaylee had gotten the VAC ban, and there'd been the whole thing of like, just some other players in the scene cheat. And people knew as well, I'll just add this in as a conflated detail. People, I think, had already heard the stories that years earlier, we won't say the names, but some very big CSGO players definitely threw games online for skins and stuff like that. We're not talking about iPower, we're talking about the ones who never got caught. There were people who did. So there already was a sense that like maybe people would do shady shit. But what I want to ask you is this, Maniac. Like I say about the genie going back in the bottle, I feel like the pro players have actually done that though. Somehow now, the messaging today is like, oh, that was just silly fans who like hated on Flusher because he was too good at the game. And they just, they're fans, so they don't know what they're looking at. They're not experts like us, No, I'm going to tell you right now, guys. On stream, Shocks was literally like, not even just saying like, this is dodgy. He was actually saying in French, like, I've seen cheats before. This is definitely cheat. I can't remember. It might even have been KRL or something. It was some other like famous French scene person was on his stream with him. Yeah. They were going through all the, I think Moorman or something was there. They were going through all these scene clips. Also, at the major itself, this major that was literally like a week and a half later or something mental. Dude, do you remember this? Like, I know the NIP players didn't fuck with them. Famously, Hellraisers didn't shake their hand. People know the story of Cloud9. Some of them came up to them and said some rude shit to them. Like, dude, from what I remember, I won't say, like, there weren't that many people went on record and said it, but dude, behind the scenes, at that major, it felt like half the teams were hating on Fnatic. Like, it might not have been just that they thought they cheated, like, but at minimum, people thought they were, like, dodgy, or they were doing something, like, some shady shit around, maybe they, like, exploit the rule. This is even before the Olaf boost, if people don't know. And then the Olaf boost, obviously, just, it's like, that's like the fucking plunger on the dynamite. It's like, once you did that, everyone hated on them. So, do you remember what this was like back then? Because as I say, I feel like everyone else has just deleted it, like, oh, I think, didn't he do just, like, a boost, and then some fans said he cheated? Like, what do you remember of this time period? What were your senses of the scene?
First of all, I think this was the whole Olaf boost and what happened after that, and the community being weaponized in order for Fnatic to back out. I think this was one of the saddest moments in fucking esports. I'm just gonna say this was one of the saddest expression of esports as a community and what it can do to people. That was one of the fucking saddest things.
Dude, the most shocking thing still to this day was that it got a forfeit. Like, I remember thinking, like, you know what it was like back then? Yeah, obviously, everyone used to do drama with the admins. We're not playing if you do that. But normally, that's just like a little kid move. What you really mean is, like, we just want something. Like, we want the game to, like, in this case, want to start on this. My assumption was, at a minimum, I don't know when, but it's going to be replayed. Like, maybe it is the whole map, maybe it's... Yeah, the basic assumption is we're at least going to get to see the game when they just told us, like, yeah, by the way, it's forfeit. Like, what? I remember hearing that and just being like, that is actually the worst possible decision no matter who you pick. You've ruined the game.
There was no way. There was no good way out of it. And the only
Yes.
thing that would help would just be time. Fucking like tragedy minus time or equals
Yeah,
emotion. Whatever equation
yes.
that is. That's exactly what needed. We just needed time to get over that shit. No, so I'm gonna try to be as candid, as genuine as I possibly can for this, because I have to throw myself back into it. I remember that in the months that leaded to Cali's ban, there were a few very weird moments. And by weird moments, I'm talking about all of these like video compilations of luck or whatever. And I couldn't explain it. Like I couldn't explain it to myself, whether it was an actual statistical probability that this would happen when you move an angle and you end up on a head, or if something, if there is a chance, because I'm thinking if I go through 100 demos of, my theory was if I go through 100 demo of a player, I will be able to whip up 10 to 15 M-locks. That was my theory, right? But still, part of me was thinking, these Swedes over there, I don't really know them. I don't really trust them. Like maybe something shady is going on. Plus, like for people who don't know, they had a very knit-tight sort of team. They weren't really meshing too much with other people. We didn't really know them so much at the very beginning. They were like laughing around, having fun together. They had sort of their own vibe going on. So I thought, well, I don't know these people. I don't really know them.
If people don't know, Fnatic, unlike NiP, where like obviously people get right now were quite social.
Yeah, exactly.
Fnatic didn't have the social people. If you went to the after party, they weren't the ones drinking there. Like, they were in their room having a fucking beer or something, right?
They weren't bad people to talk to. You could have a conversation, but it was not like a super friendly, open vibe. So we didn't really know each other too much. And that in itself probably nourished some doubts on my end. But there was a moment where everything stopped. When Cali got VAC banned, and there was this wave. I don't remember. 5 to 10 people were probably caught with the same exploit-ish.
Yep.
My theory was that at this very moment, there are probably more players than these who are fucking around with whatever cheats that is. Because I just want to put like just a little thing in context here. I have played Counter-Strike for 23 years. I started Counter-Strike when I was 10 years old. I'm 33 now. My perception of cheat at the time was wall hack, aim hack, or speed hack. I had 3 different cheats in my mind. And then that day I had a rude awakening of, wait, hold on a second. Actually, I have a program that helps me 2% or 3%, or that just gives me like a little tick of the mouse. I didn't even know that was a thing. So I discovered
that's true actually. If people don't know, there was, like you're saying, the 2 things that a lot of us, like I'm Mathieu, I wasn't super deep in the cheating world. So the 2 big discoveries to me was like, holy shit, the tech's like 100. It's like those things in the X-Files, you know, like the government's like 100 years ahead of us. Like, that's what it was like. Because the 2 things that blew my mind was, one, if you remember, one of the cheats was the notion that it wasn't just a pure aim bot. You didn't just press a button. It was the idea it was like COD. It could just like improve your aim a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Just a little bit.
So the idea was if you were like 3 pixels off, it would just move you on essentially and get the headshot. Right. So it was actually more like humanistic if you think about it. You still have to aim to some degree. You still have to get close to him. And then the other one, like you're saying, was I also thought it's just wall hack. You just see everything, don't you? No, the genius was obviously the aim key one. The idea that like, you know, you just let it pull a little bit towards and then you let go. You don't actually lock on him. Totally. Yeah, I remember even when I heard those 2 things, dude, that was terrifying because that was like, holy shit, how are we ever going to stop this if they're doing it? Like everyone could be doing this. Like, I remember that. It was crazy. Yeah.
So this shattered all my beliefs when it comes to cheating. I just realized I knew nothing. I realized I knew nothing at the time. But what I also thought is this sort of guillotine that just slammed down now on Cali's neck and other people, this for sure scared out all the people that might be using it right now.
Right.
Like this is going to be a sad day for Counter-Strike, and who the fuck knows what has happened in the past, and who the fuck knows if Cali cheated next to me on LAN to win trophies. That's because wild, I cannot sit here and guarantee you for sure that didn't happen. Uh-huh. I cannot. It's impossible for me to say. I sat next to him, I saw him play, I didn't see anything happening. That doesn't mean it wasn't happening. But the thing is, I realized, okay, up until this point, there's a bit of shade thrown in whatever happened in the past. But from now on, this should fucking scare a whole lot of people away from using it. And because famously the Fnatic era came after this, and they went on to win double major in 2015, and Flusha was still super impactful. He had incredible plays. Also, for people at home realizing after this happened, ESL events started asking us for keyboard and mouse and headset before the game day. We had to give all our hardware. They were checking it, and then we were giving it back on the game day. So, and we also had starting to have the drug test, like whatever, if you're taking any enhancement drug or whatever, that was also happening. So after all of these methods were used, Fnatic still went on to win double majors back to back, and Flusha was still MVP at that moment. And this sort of led me to think that no, actually, probably not. Like probably not. Because he's doing it now. He's doing the same plays, the same sneaky plays, the same clutches. I'm like, if he's still doing it now, well, it doesn't prove that he wasn't. That's not what it's doing. But it gives me a basis to stand on and think, okay, he can do it without anyway. And so I have no idea what if he was doing at all. If he had fallen off completely, I would just say, yeah, of course cheat. But that's not what happened. So at the very least, I have to entertain the possibility that it wasn't the case.
No, sure. By the way, I'll also say I made this point actually in my video about Flusher recently, which is the reason it's also so torturous specifically for Flusher is like, bro, if you were making a list of players whose style of play already looks like they play with a wall hack, he's top 5. It's like him, Snacks, Get Right. Like these players already, the joke is like, I've seen them on LAN where they're definitely not cheating and they can already do that. Like they already literally go around the whole time with every perfect timing, right? But you know, like just as you like go to get the fucking flashes when they pop on the corner and kill you, like every single move that enrages you if you're playing FaZe at 2 a.m, they do in pro games. So the problem is also, like it'd be easier if it was some shit player, wouldn't it, bro? Then I'd know if he's cheating or not. The problem with these guys is that they're really good and they potentially do cheat or don't, and that's why you can't figure it out. By the way, just as an aside, because people won't know all the banter, and this was technically off camera, that's also why back in the day, because there's one thing people don't know, Maniac, about me, is they do this stupid thing where they think that like they think I'm like a little kid who's like sort of, I'm confident enough on the internet to sort of be a bit cheeky and naughty, but they think in real life I'm like them, like some 14-year-old kid who's going to be all nervous, like looking at his shoes, like, oh my God, is that Olaf Meister? And they think like I'd never go and talk shit to a player. They don't know, like, talking shit's like breathing. I have to just choose to stop doing it, guys. So like, spoiler, at these events, it's not even like I was just shit talking. I used to actually go, and because I actually liked the people who were social, like a lot of the French players were, I would go among those sorts of players, and I would just be talking mad shit to all the like Happy, NBK, and one of my lines back in the day, because I had all this great canned material anytime they would fuck with me, is when in like 2015, before they got to win the conclusion of poker one where they were envious, I used to just always tell them, because they would always be arguing with me like essentially France versus everything, like, you know, Kenny S is better than whatever, Guardian, or, you know, fucking like way better than Fnatic, or, you know, or there would always be some angle, right? And so I used to tell them is, what are you talking about? You guys you're the only guys ever to win a major, losing the series 2-1. Like that used to drive them so crazy, bro, because they can't ever go back and play it again. That's also why I told them, you don't want this forfeit, mate. Like forfeits suck for that reason, because you can never actually say I won, can you? Like that, by the way, low key, I'm making a joke now, but that did actually suck. Like you actually did win a major, not actually, because the saddest thing is in the movie, this is why I get why they were so burned, that was going to be the movie scene of like, we finally got revenge on them, we won in the 3rd map, like this is, you know, everything's cool, now we're going to win on our own steam. And then they didn't. They had this stupid dispute, and quite frankly, I don't know if they admit this, that must haunt them too, that's how that match ended. No one wants that match to end that way, whether you think they cheated or not. Let's talk a bit about Fnatic though, beyond that, because one thing I'll say is this. One of the reasons I think a lot of people think of that year, 2015, the one you're talking about where they won the double majors and it was their era, the reason I think people remember that era so fondly is they think it's just stuff like, oh, you know, this was when the year that CSGO got huge. You had all the 250k events, if you remember. Like the next year, obviously, even the majors went up in money. Like everything was going crazy. This year, if people don't remember, 2015 was the one where you started the year with people making like 5k as like a crazy salary. And by the time the year ends, people are like on 20k or something crazy like that. And if it was going like really like fast evolution. So everyone remembers this is like the heyday. This is when CS was getting awesome. But I actually think Fnatic specifically, that team was also one of the main reasons why CS got so good, because if you think about it, to be the number one team, dude, they were like an anime or something. They were so palatable style of play. They were so flashy and crazy moves and people making genius individual moves. But then also at the same time, like the whole like character of the team was incredible. Like I said, like an anime, you always thought they could come back. You thought somehow like it's not over until they're. That's why I say, to me, the modern FaZe clan was like this until they actually really did start losing for real. They also used to feel like even if they're down 6-13, you're actually thinking to yourself, fuck, how are they going to pull off this crazy 16-14 win though? You actually like for real can think that though and know that like it could happen. Like I always thought that was mega, because if back then you told someone who wasn't a fan of CS like, oh, check out this next major, and they watch like Fnatic play VP or something, they're going to love it, dude. They're going to be bang on into CS. These are the teams that make you love the game. Yeah, definitely. I think also Fnatic had such defined characters within their team that were distinct from each other, right? So you had Crims, who was the pillar of reliable as a player, one of the best anchors to ever touch the game. He wasn't exactly super flashy, but he would always get the job done. Then you had JW, who would do atrocious things from a theory standpoint, but he would still get away with him. I mean, we all remember this run boost into bunny jump from Dust 2 into the middle box to get an opening kill. This breaks like 10 rules of Counter-Strike in one play. So he had that. Then you had, of course, Olaf Meister, which was
no pun intended, a Swiss Army knife. He could do everything. He could USP, he could snipe, he could rifle, he could clutch, he could open, he could everything. 2015 was his year, of course, incredible from him. Then you had Flusha, who could turn around any clutch situation. You never really talk about him, and then suddenly it was a 2 versus 4, and then Fnatic was winning it because he was behind enemy line with a crazy timing. So all of these players had a reason why you would get excited for them. That's one thing. And the other, for my money, they revolutionized the way we played classic map control. Because prior to Fnatic, I would say the golden rule was one group on the map, and I'm talking about the T side here specifically, one group on the map has resources and the freedom to try and go for a pick. They can take some map control. Let's just pretend we're playing Inferno now. You're going to have a group of 3 people towards Banana, and they're going to try to go poke the side, and then you're going to have 2 sort of lurkers, holding middle and holding apps. These 2 are passive. They're waiting. It's not their turn to play. 3 players are doing Banana business, and we see what happens. That was sort of and even Envious pushed it to 4-1 with 4 players on one side, then there was Happy famously on the other. Fnatic said, well, wait a minute. Why don't we do 2 and 2? Why don't we have people fucking around the B side at the same time we're taking middle? And if you're playing against them, because you've been playing Counter-Strike for a few years, you have no idea. You don't understand what's going on. You're getting a B execute smokes on your face, plus there's someone in boiler fighting you, plus there's a smoke long. So it's like, what are they doing? Where are they going? This doesn't make sense. And so you would go for information, they would freeze you because they were also the best at freezing like halfway through a position. You would go for information, they would punish you, and then they would wield around. And that, from a tactical standpoint, they were probably one of the first ones to do that, to send players as little group skirmish around, make sure you're going to make a mistake, and then have that late round situation where they would make the right call. So yeah, in terms of Counter-Strike, they were part of a revolution, I would say.
Oh, by the way, the other one as well, because you're right, there's 2 classic JW clips everyone remembers. One's like that one where he does the boost up and he runs along short and he jumps onto the mid box and like, I think he shoots someone from like the railing maybe, shoots the guy from like the suicide position where normally the open T side has the advantage, shoots that guy and then like goes like lower B or like fucking mid or something. The other one, if you remember, was the same map. It's the one where he runs long A, and I think it was against TSM like the Danes, and I think it's like Cajun B or someone throws a molly into the long A, does too. So you think, right, well, that's like no one could come through that. And as he turns from throwing it, JW goes through the molly and like jumps back and just kills her, I think, from behind. And I even remember watching this clip, and I think it was Cajun B, because whoever it was, I was like at an event, like at the like, you know, airport after this event, and I remember saying to them, bro, that clip is actually the most bullshit clip ever, because I watched it from your POV, and that you did it exactly right. Like, that's the whole point of a Molotov, is that like we block that area. Like, you have no reason to ever think he could be there. And in fact, like you're saying, I'd actually even say, if I was the coach of GW, that's actually like a terrible play. Don't go for that, like, because every time you do that and it doesn't work, like say the guy hadn't rotated off yet, he just kills you immediately. And you had an AWP as well, by the way, like you've just completely tanked the round, like you're with 5v4 game. But because this shit would work, I always used to think the genius of that team for real was that, like, because you had Flusher and JW doing this like bonkers shit, that's almost like a distraction. Meanwhile, Olaf and Crims are actually just meat and potatoes. So yes, they're just killing you with like 2 kills every round, like from normal positions, like the way. That's why if you were Prodax, that must have been an amazing team to lead. You got all the weapons, mate. You've got the whole toolkit. By the way, another team from this era as well, because that's the other thing. I actually do have a vision of history, by the way, in the same way as I have like the theory of like, I do believe in what you call superstar theory. I don't think there are just a load of good players, and you know, if you just put like 5 good players in a team, you win. I think you do need like a superstar if you want to be the best team ever in the world. Because my theory goes, because a superstar is so much better, when you have that one game you really need to win where your team's losing, they can just win you the game. Like if you rely just on the team, you're not going to be able to sort of get those miracles. So in the same way as I believe in like the superstar theory in that sense, I also do believe what makes CS enjoyable is the elite teams. Like, it's all well and good having a scene and competition, but what you really need is awesome top teams that have a really fucking cool style of play to watch. So another one from this era I have to bring was obviously Virtus.pro, isn't it? I always say this. I don't know how or why, because they were like this when they were a different lineup in 1.6. Somehow this team just made all the best matchups. Like, it didn't matter who they played. If they were playing the Danes of Astralis, fucking amazing games. If they were playing like MSL's teams, those would be awesome games with Morph back and forth. If they were playing Fnatic, these are some of the most epic back and forth games ever. Like, literally, Navi, dude, you can go down the line. Like, this one team versus anyone was basically like just must watch CS. I know they're obviously famous for other reasons, but I always thought just the style of play alone, who isn't a fan of this team? They're just fucking amazing to watch, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they were one of the first team to truly embody like the idea of momentum, right? Whenever they get the advantage, holy shit, like you're about to feel it. Whenever they know that they have you in the ropes, they're gonna start playing faster and duel oriented, and they will go to the simplest and the simplest and the simplest move to beat you. And also, I think they were probably at the time underrated from a skill standpoint. I think they had extremely skilled players. Like Bayali is definitely not the hero of that story, but yeah, he was shooting like hell. Snax was obviously upcoming, and then we know what Snax happened to be. And then I also think that with the experience, because for people who aren't aware, likes of NIO and Taz were very familiar with competition, even Pasha as well, because they had known sort of that sphere and that circle. I think they were mentally very equipped to deal with a whole lot of like high pressure situation. Like they dealt with it much better than most of the other teams, and you were going up against them, and I obviously squared with them quite a few times.
Sure.
And when the scoreline was getting to 14-14, like they were not shaking at all.
Yes.
Like was probably when they would actually hit you with their best execute, and everything would be polished, and they would win the round. And like this was a little bit the idea of there are players who are going to step up in high pressure situation. They are going to make the move that matters because they have like the backbone and they have the nerves to do it. And VP were a very good example of that. They were like, if we were a bunch of kids playing Counter-Strike, they were men. Like they were men. They were adults. They were coming in, and if you had a little bit of doubt, they would kick you in the ass, and that was it. And I was on the beating or the other end of that beating a couple times before we actually beat them in Cologne. But yeah, I liked it. I liked how there was some roughness to their game. Like they were rough. You know, if you're getting a little bit weak, that's it. Are you about to get contacted with one pop flash? They were one of the first ones to just do on Mirage. Like everyone just pop flash through the smoke A-ramp. No one really was doing that. Like we all thought, oh, that's okay. That smoke is safe. No. If they felt like you were doubting, one or two pop flash, that's it. Everyone out the ramp, straight in your face, never let you breathe. And that was super exciting to watch and really unfun to play against.
Yeah, along those lines, by the way, a couple of things. One is that what you're talking about, that style of play, like what they essentially understood as a core of players somehow was like how pressure works in the game. And like you're saying, at the right moment, they know how to like pile it on and make that like an enemy against you, basically, and make it worse for you. Because if people don't know, they not only did that in the game, but like that was actually part of the mystique of VP, if people don't know. Like they would actually keep a whole vibe of like, they would sometimes like mock other players, or they'd have a vibe of sort of like, they had like a standoffish attitude, if people don't know. But the funny thing is, years later, if you did get to know them, I already knew some of the players anyway, but like when the other, like the French scene and the Danish scene actually got to hang out with them, these are actually some of the most chill people, by the way. They're not actually violent people. Like these people aren't like getting into fights, but they understood that because people have this image of like, what's this fucking big burly guys coming from Poland, holy shit, look at Pasha. Like they knew how to play up to that though. Like they did give you, they had intimidation factor like no other team. The difference is, if someone like Fnatic or Astralis is intimidated, it's because of what they're going to do to you in the server. For real, the vibe with VP is like, if you trash talk them too much, maybe they beat you up. They wouldn't really, by the way. That's never really even on the table unless you were a dickhead. But like, there was a vibe like that. People were intimidated by the Maniac, right? People did sort of feel like, fuck, you better not fuck around. It's VP. Like that was a real thing. Yeah. And then the other thing I'll just throw in there is, you've nailed it, by the way. Dude, at this point in history, Bialy's mega underrated. Like, now, what's weird is, because of all the epic players, everyone remembers Snax. Everyone goes, oh, Snax was brilliant. It's like, mate, it was Snax and Bialy back then. And in fact, if you go back far enough, once upon a time, there's a reason Pasha was like top 10 in HLTV that year they won the major. He was a monster back in there. It was only for a year or so, but he was very good. No, Bialy's mega underrated, mate. Again, this is one of those players where, like, if you want to see like amazing aim, if I could take you to some games in like 2015 where this guy has as good aim as anyone with a rifle, mate. He's like, he had the fucking laser. Like you remember what he was like when he'd just be on like a cache on the A site or something. Like you could never get him off it. He was just going to fucking kill 3 people and be alive if you can't get to him. Like he's a nightmare to play. Like that's actually a player where he didn't work on his personality. He didn't try to do interviews, so people can't remember him. He probably is mega underrated now, mate. He's a mega player. Think how many years he was at the top as well. Like a solid 2 or 3 years where he's elite player basically.
But I think he was used the way he was supposed to be used. I think this was one of the strengths of VP as well. And at least for me, that team helped build what I believed was a right recipe for success, which is the ratio between experience and sort of new players coming up and have the raw mechanical skill. But you also need to have people with personality and need people to have nerves. And they were all sort of bringing something different to the table because, again, you're talking about this standoffish attitude. Whenever you were in a 2 versus NiKo and Taz, they're not going to chicken shit the clutch and play it wrongly. Like they might not be at the peak of their career mechanically, but they know how they're supposed to play that clutch. And they have no doubt about it. Whereas the Bayali, the Snacks and all, they were super mega skilled. Of course, Snacks was also a genius of the game. That was a nice little coincidence at the time. But they would just send out Bayali like a heat-seeking missile just out of ramp with a couple flashes. And same with Pasha. Like, honestly, the impact that Pasha had compared to his mechanical skill is bonkers.
Oh, it's respectable,
because if you compare him to other MVPs, people who arguably could do better with just a mouse and a keyboard in itself in isolation, but they never really had the impact that he had because, hey, he didn't care at all. Like, if he thought he could 4K you, and if he should have gone back after 2, there's none of that. Like, if he thinks he can get 3, he'll go. If he can get 4, he'll be in your face again. So, yeah, he was really pushing the envelope. And I liked what they built. I liked the blueprint of like experience and new blood coming together. That helped form like a model that I kept with me for many of my years, and I still sort of have it. In fact.
You know, the saddest thing is as well, I actually do think there was a lesson in that team that other big squads could have done, but people just didn't for like personal reasons, which is, in my opinion, Astralis and Fnatic, like the all-time great lineups of their particular squads, actually did also have this quality, which is the genius of the team. If people remember, famously, VP never used to recruit anyone. They had that line that was like, instead of changing players, we change roles. And that sounds like just some shit you'd say in like a movie or something. It doesn't sound real, right? But I actually do think that's what some of these other teams did. Like, I think there were times, like if you look in Astralis, there were times when people like Dupree gave up some of their space or took some of the space as the entry if they needed to. In Fnatic, there was times when JW was like seemingly the main guy, then Olaf was the main, you know what, it seemed like whatever period they were in, they could adapt in that regard. Whereas I do think actually there were some other all-time great teams where it's like if it didn't work, they just caught someone. And it's like some of these squads, when you've got players that are good enough, like the VP one, maybe it's only a tweak you need. You know what I mean? Like maybe like one person has to just call on a certain map. Maybe we just need like let's redo our Inferno CT spots or something. Because I will say one thing that a lot of teams do actually do as well, Maniac, maybe this was old school thinking, was a lot of this is why I always thought was whack. The best example is, you know, when the Brazilians fell off on Inferno and they just couldn't play Inferno anymore. If you ever watched, dude, they still had Cold Zero, who was like the best pit player in the whole world. And I used to say to Fallen, bro, you have the best in the world at one site. Like, you don't just give up on the map. You have to just keep trying, like, essentially, like, figure out a different B setup, figure out a different rotation, whatever it is. Like, it'd be stupid to give up this advantage, wouldn't it? Like, think about it. If you've got the best guy on a spot on a map, you want to find a way to make it work. But, like, yeah, basically, that approach, like, everyone else does just cut someone and just get the new guy or get the new guy with the better numbers. Like, that VP approach is also mad admirable because they didn't just say it, dude. They actually did it. Like, it clearly worked 2 or 3 times over a bunch of years.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to preface what I'm going to say with that I don't exactly know what was happening within the team, so I'm going to suggest or imagine what could be happening. They would probably be in a better position to talk about it as I am. But I have a feeling that this line that you're talking about from VP, they actually went through the whole, we are going to talk to each other and there are issues and we're not changing and fuck it, let's talk about it. Whereas I think a whole lot of people in Counter-Strike, just in life in general, have a tendency to shy away from this confrontation and just say, hey, you know what, this lineup ain't working. Well, obviously this isn't my fault, so player at the bottom of the stats, well, you are the one on the hot seat, thank you very much. You're the reason why we're losing. Have a good day. We're going to recruit someone else who's better and suddenly we're going to win. I think VP were probably one of the first ones to say, okay, why are we not winning? Like, what is going on? Do we have the wrong positions here? Is someone not doing their job? Should I be the AWP? Should I be the leader? Do you want to try to be the leader? And this idea that you're really going to exhaust all of the solutions that you have within the roster and you're going to address whatever the hell is going on and try to figure it out in itself, I think is good. I guess the downside or the flip side of it is you might sometimes be a bit too stubborn and you know, might miss the chance. I think a lot of people would argue that VP in some moments in history could have had a new blood from the Polish scene who was up and coming.
Potentially. And
this could have been a difference maker when the team was on the falling out, which was obviously after all of the moments that we were remembering here. But still, I appreciated the idea of like, hey, we're 5, we're in this together. Why is it not working? Let's talk about it. Well, how can we fix it? How do we try? Why is it not working? Instead of just shying away from this and just do the easy thing, which is to switch line, because the French scene was obviously famous for that. Like anything that wasn't going good after a few months, we just switch a player like we're switching socks and be like, well, surely this is going to be better now because all of the other issues that we've had in the past lineups will evaporate now that someone else is coming in. Obviously, this was non-spoken, but this was one of the like unofficial truth that people thought would actually happen. So I like that VP were not on that boat.
No, mate, if people don't know, back in the day, the French scene was more like the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. It's like you just wake up one day and half the team's gone. Like, you're out, you're fired, we've all betrayed you, we're bringing you. And not only that, it's just like Game of Thrones. It's like, we're not just replacing you, we're bringing in the most hated enemy ever to replace you. Like, you're like, what the hell? I thought we all hated them. Exactly. I thought we all hated that fucker. And now he's just here in the team. That's exactly what it's like. I know, it's ridiculous. They were so cynical as well with some of the cuts. Like, because I've told this story before. Like, I've obviously, if you come from England, you learn French in school, and I knew a little bit about the French scene in 1.6, but I've always said this, it wasn't that big in 1.6. Obviously, people played Source instead, so, like, I knew, like, MSX or the old school guys from Against All Authority or whatever, but, like, I wasn't super hooked into the scene. So I remember, I actually didn't know that much about French culture. I remember going to the early events and saying to people like Samuel, like, but what's going on? Because I could understand like the basic, like the most basic level French. And then when I would listen to them talking, people who in theory are supposed to hate each other maniac, like Existence and MBK, or like Shocks and MBK, you know, all the people who had all the rivalries, in these bars at the after party, they would all just be like, oh, how are you doing? And they talk, and I'd be like, what the fuck? They hate that guy. They just caught him a month ago. And someone was like, it's just the way they do things, mate. Like, you know, like he told me that essentially like the culture reality is different from sort of like the team reality and being in the squad, and he's supposed to like separate them out. So at the time, I remember just thinking, like, this scene is wild, bro. Like, literally, like they're gonna cut this, like, and they'd be doing it the other way around. Like, they'd all be really funny. I'm like, but I've heard he's already out, and they're like, oh yes, he's out next week. Like, holy shit. So the French scene already was fucking wilding. But I've got another angle I can bring up here actually, which is, you know what, Maniac? First of all, I am one of those people who I don't believe in that shit. You know, when everyone tries to tell you to be humble in life, let other people say that you're good and you succeeded. You shouldn't have to say it yourself. Fuck that, Maniac. Because I can tell you in life, that's not the way my life is. I never sat back and just waited for people to give me. I have to just take everything I want, mate. So I take my credit. So I'll actually toot my own horn. One thing I do think I'm pretty good at in esports in general is essentially, it's just described as player performance. I can look at people's performance. I think I have a pretty good sense of like how good the person is, like how good they are relative to their normal level, like, you know, is there any flaws? I think I'm pretty good at sort of like scouting people, right? And I'm going to take full credit for this. Dude, I told you back in fucking, I think it was like late 2015, early 2016. I know at a minimum it was that event we did, like a Star Ladder, when you did one with us. When you started being an analyst and doing like the odd event, but at the time you were about to take over coaching Envious, so you were going to go back to that world and only be able to do like the odd event with us, basically. Let's say like 1 out of every 4 events or something. Right. I did actually tell you back then, like, dude, you should just do this full on. Like, this should just be your job. Like, you should just be an analyst, basically. Like, it's a waste of time trying to play or coach you. And at the time, I obviously thought it was a waste of time trying to coach that team. It's probably the most uncoachable team in the history of fucking Counter. The joke is the IGL doesn't want to be coached. Like, but the reason why I'm going to toot my own horn on this is everyone else does that to everyone, Maniac. Like even when people, I don't think we're that appropriate as analysts, like Freiburg and stuff, get right. When people like that retire, all the fans are always like, oh, it's okay, you can just go on the desk now, like as though there's like 500 spots on the desk. And I always tell people, don't say that, bro, because first of all, he might not like it. Like, he might do 2 events, like the aforementioned Freiburg, and go, this isn't my shit. And secondly, he just might not be that suited for it. But I actually do think it was just obvious to me that you would actually be a good fit on the desk, because in analysis, we had tons. This is the myth, right? Everyone thinks it's more like, oh, we need more people who know what they're talking about. Like, I'm the only non-fucking pro till Maui Snake came along, guys. Like, even Yanko's played 1 billion, like, online games of Counter-Strike and, like, official games and qualified stuff. Like, these people were all former pros, but the difference is your style of how you do it as a former pro is different, though, mate. Like, a lot of people, they either do just become an analyst. It's like the world forgets they were a pro, or their only thing is that I was a pro. Like, you know that angle? I'm not a big fan of it, mate. Where like, the more rookie hosts, all they do is, like, they'll have a ex-pro, so they just go, well, as a pro, what would you have done in this? It's like, that's interesting sometimes, but I actually personally prefer it when they volunteer that, because sometimes, like, for example, I mean, I'll use you for example, sometimes they do it a bit inappropriate, Maniac. Like, they will just say, like, to you or Yanko, they'll be like, so as a pro, you know, you're in a big grand final and, like, you're on stage. It's like, how would they fucking know? Like, you've actually picked the one area being a pro, they didn't. Like, guess what? Yanko wasn't in a big grand final of, like, fucking Kudos Arena against Astralis. Like, he actually doesn't, that's the one thing he doesn't know anything about being a pro on. So what I want to go back to is, though, did you actually have a similar vibe? Like, did you actually have a sense there's something here for me if I'm being an analyst? Because when you started off, I would say your style's fairly similar. You maybe were a little bit more reserved because obviously you were coming from being a pro, but to me it was always obvious, like, you had a very unique flavour to you compared to everyone else.
I think the reason why I immediately accepted offers coming my way in 2018 is probably because of these odd events that you mentioned. Because end of 2015, beginning of 2016, I dipped my toes, and I had 2 or 3 events I probably did when I was in and out in projects, and so I got a little bit of the vibe of it, and I had a fairly good time in spite of all the anxiety that I had, like performance anxiety, and I didn't know anybody really, and I felt a little bit out of sort, and I wasn't exactly in any inner group. So from a social standpoint, it was a little bit challenging and complicated. But I did feel like, hey, you know what, this actually is something. This is interesting. I'm having a good time. But I think I wasn't ready mentally to just like give up. I wasn't ready at all to give up on what it was that I was doing. And I think this is probably also the reason why it turned out great for me in 2018 is because when I retired, I was ready for it. Like if people ask me, hey, do you miss competing? Yes. Yeah, of course I miss competing. I miss that feeling. I miss the camaraderie. I miss winning. I miss the adrenaline. I miss the pressure. I miss all of that. But when I stopped in 18, like I knew that was it. I am going to stop. The circle, it has come to an end. This chapter is now closed with the success and the defeats, with the highs and the low. That is now where my life is, and I want to move on, and it was fine. But I did have a feeling that, hey, holy shit, if I can make it as an analyst, this would be an awesome way to remain connected to the community and keep, being a part of it, watching all these events, and somehow living with it. But I think I was also aware that this is highly competitive. Like maybe people don't get that sense now because a lot of the faces are kind of coming on a routine fashion, and I've been to every single big event for 3 years now probably. So you get the sense that probably life is probably easy. They just get a message and that's it. It's actually really competitive. Like there's a lot of people who would like to do this, and
for sure.
I don't know. I cannot talk for my other colleagues, of course, but I personally I have a really high expectation and standard of what it is that I want to deliver when I'm on the desk. So if you want to keep, I think I just needed to be sure that I was ready for that kind of investment, because I didn't want to just rock up and be like, oh yeah, here I am, Titan Maniac, blah, 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 B split, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, like I wanted to really fully immerse into it. And even then, it took me probably 1.5 to 2 years to actually break through. So it's not as easy as it looks by any stretch of imagination.
By the way, I actually do think it's quite cool, though, that you've actually essentially been able to have a second career and it's still ongoing now. Because if you think about like where you were in the mix of people around like 2016, 2017, dude, it would just be sad right now. You would either have had to completely retire, in which case no one would know you. You'd be off away from the scene. You wouldn't be doing anything. Or even worse, you'd just be one of these people now. Like, I'll say this because he's a mate of mine. Like, actually, it bums me out when I see results about eyeballers and JW and that. It's like, oh, he still plays. Oh, fuck. Because part of me knows he's never going to be at the top again. He's never going to probably even be in big tournaments. So even though on the one hand it's like, look, if you want to keep doing it, keep doing it. But at the same time, part of it's like, oh fuck, isn't it? Like it almost feels like, isn't there a second career he could have? Couldn't he do something else? Couldn't he be relevant in some way? So it's kind of cool you actually got a whole second career though.
Yeah, I feel super fortunate, and I feel also very fortunate because in my own way of seeing things, and maybe that's twisted, but I see it as an opportunity to be successful the same way as I saw as a player, right? That's how I see it. Like I'm doing a job, and I can do this job to a good degree or to a bad degree, and this is how success can look like, and this is what's going to happen if I do a good job, and if I'm able to take in feedback and get better at it, and I have like milestones and things I want to achieve, and it's like it stimulates the competitor in me, in a sense. Like I'm not just satisfied with yeah, cool, now I did one major and I can just go and whatever. No, I think if you look at it in that way, it can stimulate that search for like bettering yourself. And I think in this line of work, and maybe you're better positioned than I am for the content creation, so maybe it's a little bit different, but in the broadcast talent, I think there's a make or break moment where you either fully embrace the entirety of being a broadcast talent, and it's way more than just knowing the game. Obviously it is important, but it's about being able to step outside of your comfort zone, do things you're not exactly sure you can do, improvise on camera, fill for hours when nothing is working, create relationships with the workers, the productions, the people with you. You either embrace it fully and you go head on, or you leave. You do a few events and you leave. And that moment has passed for me. I'm fully committed. And I see it the way as I saw it as a player. Like, how can I be better? What can I do now that I'm not really comfortable with? Matter of fact, I'm going to take a risk here to look very vulnerable, but I'm currently reading on like how the writers for late night shows are like writing jokes, like how to build monologues, and like, how the punchline and how that works and like the good ways to do it. It's like one of the things that I obviously do way worse than you do, for example, is like natural humor in English. It's my second language.
Yeah.
I consider myself to be relatively funny in French. You can have a conversation at dinner. We can riff around. It's much harder for me to do that in English, to be able to improvise and have like punchline and word plays and extend your vocabulary and all that shit. That's not natural. And I can also just decide to say, well, fuck it, I'm not doing it. Or I can try. And like Pro League, for example, is a good format to goof around a little bit and not do the thing that I believe I'm just good at. So yeah, I think that's what I mean by embracing the whole thing, is trying to better yourself and stepping out of your comfort zone.
By the way, another thing as well for a modern fan that they won't know. I mean, technically, if I go off that 3-year span thing, Maniac, technically a modern fan's only ever seen me at one event. Just that last major.
Yeah.
That's all I've ever done by that logic. I never did any others. But when I used to do basically all the events back in the day, another thing people probably won't realise is I never pretended I was some genius, by the way, who like reinvented the concept of broadcasting Counter-Strike. But basically, it was the other way around. It's that the level was so low when I began. I just remember thinking like, dude, there's so much we could do with this. This is just garbage. Like back then, when I started, a desk really was like a host who generally is just like a general esports host. Usually it's the ones actually like, funny thing is now they get to like be with us at every event. But back then, a lot of the hosts were people who actually hosted like just every esports event. Like after that, they went and did a StarCraft 2 one and a Dota 1. And then they would come back for the next, ESL 1 or whatever tournament. And each circuit would have their own host. And it would be a similar thing. So like MLG had that pocket guy, and we had Smix, who was, if people don't know, was actually like a StarCraft person. We had people from every game. Obviously Red Eye was doing everything. And when you would have these people, the analyst, the person in my position, usually was just an ex-pro. Often back in the day, because I started when it was like real, like it's a job. Before it was a job as well, it's usually just people who got eliminated. It's like, you went out on day one, or your team was supposed to be the favourite, but they went out in the quarters, so, people want to give you some airtime. So if you are Get Right or something like, or NBK, or you come to the desk and you do, your 10 minutes or whatever. So basically, when I started, it was the most generic shit of all time. It was like football, host game interviews, and how boring they are, where it's like, so why'd you win the game? Well, we started the first game, and everyone just says like a bunch of like not very interesting, like they sort of know what they're supposed to say, but it's not that interesting. You can almost tune it out, right? And so if people don't know, I always say the real thing that saved like my style of doing CS, like the banter and all the silly stuff like that, is because of all the fucking shit tech problems we had back then. Like every event, you remember as a pro, they used to get almost every game got delayed, or there'd be a tech pause in the game. And some of these tech problems, like it was literally like the nightmare for a broadcast. It could either last 5 minutes or 50 minutes, and you can't know which when it starts. Well, the point was, in that scenario, it wasn't even that someone told us like banter and make, it's like that's all you could do. There's no game to talk about. So people like me and Richard were doing like the banter style. And essentially what really happened was this, Maniac, because it would happen constantly, and the worst thing you could do was like put the stream onto like a screen like back in 10 minutes, because then actually a lot of fans themselves are going to leave or turn off the stream or think, fuck it, right? Because what you want to do is keep them engaged with someone on camera. Essentially, it just gave me carte blanche that then I could say whatever I wanted, because essentially in that moment, no one's telling me what to say. They need someone to say something. I can talk forever, and then also, spoiler, because I'm sort of saving the show, I can also be even naughtier. I can be a bit edgy with the joke. I could do some I could even, like, I've even done this before. I could even banter like the production team if they're fucking me up with a graphic or something. And so at the time, I actually was essentially sort of allowed to get like completely out of control. Like if you ever watch those events back in the day, no one will say it now because they're trying to hate on me, but like back then, dude, pros used to get mad pissed off for all the shit I was saying, because like it was too raw, right? Like if there's this is one thing that like, people will never understand, Maniac, is like pros can handle like some jokes, but most pros do actually think of it as like a skill hierarchy. Like to them, here's the difference, right? NiKo can make a joke to them, Maniac. They'll take that. Fair enough. Maybe even if they like them, like some smaller player, maybe like, I don't know, fucking Shiro could make a joke to them. You can't just be a nobody. Like I'm just some fucking guy. I was never a pro player. Dude, pros hated this. They hated the idea of like an open mic where I'm allowed to just make fun of you. And if I think you're overrated, which obviously people like Smiths were hating on, I'd just be straight up saying I think you're shit, basically. Like, I think you're shit. The only reason you're in the team is because this guy keeps you in. You shouldn't even be on the AWP anymore. Like, people weren't used to this. This was like, I think it's like a bottle of cold water in people's face. Do you remember this era? I mean, to be fair, I was going pretty hard on you, so you remember this?
I was going to say, I was on the receiving end too. I know exactly how it was.
True. I thought that way,
yeah. Definitely. Maybe that just traumatized me. That's why it took me a long time to be bantery on the desk. I was like, oh shit, this is how it happened in the past.
At least you overcame it though, mate. All I'll say is this. Yeah. I actually think, no joke, I sort of did PTSD Chad. Like, I've noticed Chad's just never attempted to come at me ever since then, mate. Which, fair enough, it works. But, like, I think I was just too mean to him when he was a player. And he can't, like, I think he has to, like, not access that part of his brain, or, like, he'd hate me or something. So, I don't know. It was pretty wild, though.
At least you went so deep in it that it created a very safe space for us to banter a little bit, because we're like, we would never go to that page. It's like there's a safe space that can be exploited very easily.
I always used to actually say it, as weird as it sounds, that was not all of it was conscious, but actually eventually that is actually a conscious thing I have tried to do, because I do it on my talk shows and people don't notice. I know a lot of fans are like, why do you talk so much? Like, because in doing so I give all my guests permission to talk pretty much as they want, and if they have like a thought, you notice on my show we don't do that thing like, look, sorry, I know this is a digression. It's like, the show is digression, just if it's interesting, keep talking, let's keep going. And I let people do that, but also like you're saying, because I'm going to go like this close to the line, it means that then when NiKo says, I actually think this team's just bad, people go like, ooh, but they don't lose their mind. Like, if he's the only one who says that, by the way, and there's no me, I mean, Maui's getting it now. You can be fucking crucified by the fans. Like, they hate it when, again, like I said, when they think you're some little nobody. I mean, this is what Maui basically got from the Farney and Simple, wasn't it? Their message basically was like, shut the fuck up, little guy who wasn't a pro. We're pros and we know better than you. Stop talking about us. Like, even though to an outsider that's mad, like that actually was sort of the vibe. So I did try to do it. And then the other thing as well is, if people don't know, one of the reasons I was always very welcoming of certain people like you and NiKo is I understand where my skills begin and end though, mate. So I always knew, like, it can't only be entertainment. Like, I can do the WWE shit, and look, if we're doing serious historical stuff, I can do a lot of really great stuff there. But like, I want someone who actually is coming from like the tactical perspective, or someone who was very recently a pro, knows these people personally. Like, we needed other things on the desk to fit it out too. Like, I would say the most positive thing that came out of my era of doing that is it just gave people permission to do a lot of this stuff. And by the way, this is where people never get my personality. I'm not the guy where I like hate on other people or like my peers. If someone does really good work that I would enjoy, I'm going to be loving it, dude. Like, I fucking love it when they make like a good skit on like an ESL event or something. Like, there's the reason I started doing those for people like Flashpoints, I want people to do funny skits and do like interesting angles and have like, because by the way, the thing that's awesome about those is they get the narrative out there so much easier. Like, if you were one of these people in esports who's like in like League of Legends, for example, and you watch maybe you watch IEM Cologne or something, you might know a bit about the whole thing about like Huxley and G2. But if you watch 2 or 3 of those skits, you get it immediately. The joke's obvious, and you'll immediately sort of know what with one of the storylines in CS. So I'm actually glad people finally do a lot of that shit. Like, I hope everyone continues.
Yeah, and I think it went from a few individuals having ideas to now being actually a widespread concept that we're trying to be more engaging, right? We're trying to be more engaging, we're trying to be more entertaining, we're trying to create stories, and maybe sometimes as an analyst or as a pundit or whatever you want to say, it can be a little bit complicated to navigate the waters between like being a hardcore analyst, but also be a little bit on the entertaining side of things, and you kind of have to pendulum, and I think very great personalities at that can vary from one to the other depending on who they are with. And this is what you're looking for when you're watching a desk. And one of the reasons why this was always working when we were on the desk together is that I knew I had freedom to be as tactical as I wanted to be and to get into any detail I wanted to do, because I knew you would do like all of the housekeeping, history side of things, any kind of long-standing narratives would be there, and then you would fuck around with a couple players and I would balance it out with some idea. This was working because there was balance. And then a desk can be made of many different people, and there's always a different sort of synergy that's happening. And if you're really good at what you do, then you can adapt. You can get funkier, you can get more serious, you can get into the history, you can measure the gravitas that you put into it, because you cannot treat every game like it's the final of the major. That gets boring. No one wants that. There are games that you have to treat with levity. Some games you have to treat with gravitas. You have to be able to vary the level as well. I mean, we've gone a long way in broadcast in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years. I've only witnessed the 5 from the inside, but 5 to 10 years. And arguably, there is still a long way to go. And I think the risk is always when you get too comfortable and you stop wondering how you can do it better. I think this is when things stall a little bit.
Oh, by the way, as a random aside, I'll even tell people one thing I actually, like, I don't have a lot of regrets because I'm the sort of person where I actually have the philosophy that if you really cared about that thing, you would just concentrate on doing it right next time and not making the same mistake, basically, instead of, like, I think a lot of, like, regret is people just sort of, like, moaning and just think, like, it's unfair, or what if this happened, that hadn't happened. Like, but I do acknowledge when I would do things differently if I redid it now. Like, one thing I did make a mistake of in the latter years of CS is essentially when Twitter went from just being like fun to like people just being mean all the time, like fucking high school or something, I actually kept reading the replies for too long, mate. So it made me like a little bit bitter, because I have to say my favourite periods when I think of it is I even used to be really good before people got too mean at doing like the wrestling villain thing. Like, I would be at an event doing the event, simultaneously having some like mad like back and forth battle with a player or like team that I think's overrated, and they're like big clones of him, as example, where they're just winning the matches inexplicably, and I would just be sort of like, these teams shit, and there'd be like it's like the wrestling rivalry between me and them at the event while we do it. So like that always made it fun. Like in the green room, people would always be like, who are you arguing with now? And there'd be like some player I'm going back and forth. Like the key thing I lost track of myself a little bit there was, if you read the replies and people are being too mean, you just get drawn into the actual emotional drama of like, oh, fuck you. Like when I actually was able to keep it WWE and know it was just fun and games and just banter, like that was easily the best time period in my sense. Like, because I actually do think like Maui's doing it now and I think it's really effective. Like I'd Pimp flirted with it for a while. I guess Kassad does it with the Huxley angle. I think personally it's fire. Like that, even though people went too far with it. Like that moment when Huxley appeared on camera at Cologne with fucking Kassad, when you even just see the framing of the shot, you know it's going to be amazing. You just know at some point one of them's going to make some inference to it, aren't they? Like, and obviously that was like, by the way, well played to Huxley, that was funny. Like he actually properly pulled it off. He even did sort of like the comedic, like, that was actually quite subtle the way he did that with like the little glint to the side of it. Like it was well done. Like those moments of fire, I actually think like that aspect of WWE, I go, do more of that. I want more of that shit. Like the stupid thing is really, I'll give you the obvious example to me. The real thing that's a shame is when it's just on Twitter. Like the joke is, it would actually be way more fire if Simple had actually like come up to Maui on a fucking desk and said, I actually think you were wrong about Nafani. That would be amazing. Not just some stupid throwaway shitty tweet there. And then all the people jumping in on Twitter, little bro thinks he's on the tip. No one cares about that, man. No one gives a fuck. All you nephews, I know you think that really hurts our feelings. You don't. I always say this. In isolation, none of those comments mean anything. The only thing that gets you down is if you read 1,000 of them in a day, then you're like, no, this fuck sucks. Because yeah, it sucks that people hating on you, but they're not clever comments. So I actually think that aspect of CS, I also think, by the way, that's a strength we have in CS that we don't have in other games. I can tell you in League of Legends or whatever, mate, you just can't do these things. Not only would fans really hate on you if you ever like dissed the player, but like the idea Riot would like just go crazy like I was on death. It never happened. That's why when Valorant first came out, dude, I actually tried to tell my fans, but people weren't thinking of it. Because everyone was like, it's just like CS. I was like, yeah, but don't ask me to be in the game. They're never going to let me on a bloody desk, you idiot. Like, me and Monty aren't going to be on fucking Valorant World Championship. Oh, you idiots. Like, Riot hates us. So I don't think people know. CS is very unique for this flavour. Like, we still have a lot of it as well. Like, we still have people like Pimp and Maui out there giving us a little, every now and then, a little spicy taste. Every now and
it's
then.
always, I mean, listen, I'm not going to lie. As a viewer of these interactions, I'm loving it. I'm watching
awesome,
the whole fucking hell is let loose. I think the only challenge is being able to deal with whatever comes with it, right? Because I think it's a two-way street. If you fuck around on the socials, if you fuck around on broadcast, then you open up an avenue back to you.
Oh,
like
for
the
sure,
same way Kassad, I saw it yesterday. So we're doing this episode now. It's Saturday morning. Kassad put out a tweet yesterday with NiKo's triple one tap, and he was like, "This is what GOAT do."
Yes,
and then I answered to him and I said, I tried to find your tweet for map 3, but I couldn't find it. I think my browser is not working. So that's the thing, right? You have to be able to deal, because if you jump on and you fuck around, then you have to be ready.
And if people didn't say, just because, this is why I love when people are on brand as well, though, dude. When they did actually lose, G2 lost the series. All Kassad tweeted was, kick him.
That's so stupid. Like, it's so stupid.
That made me laugh so much, though, dude.
I mean, I love it.
It's over the top, I know.
It's such a stupid take, you know. I rewatched map 3 and it's such a stupid take.
I do love it though. It's entertaining. I can't lie. It is entertaining though.
Yeah, but it's so dumb. So I'm like, okay, you know what? Fair enough. Like, if you can deal with whatever's coming your way, fair enough. And this is probably one of the ways that I have to deal with, because I take things way too seriously. Okay. Like, you know, when you say you let 1,000 comments get to you, I take it too seriously. Like, I have to just do the whole like fuck it. And I'm trying to do it more. Like, just put like a bombshell and just
exactly.
Don't even look at it. Like whatever for the sake of the entertainment. Because if you value any single profile that leaves a comment and you're trying to argue with it, you're just going to lose yourself.
They're going to wreck you.
No, exactly. It's just never going to work. But yeah, what a dumbass.
No, I'll even give you the analogy that one of the things that helped change my mind was actually Richard Lewis helped me with this, believe it or not. He's also someone, if you notice, has cleaned up his Twitter a bit now, doesn't have as many big battles, right? One of the things he told me, and this actually, it's just the way he framed it was genius. He said to me, like, I'm not even one of these people who's a hater. I'm not going to tell you shit on Twitter or he said to me, it doesn't matter how good you are, though. He said it's like if you were like the best boxer in the world. If you really let any random stranger who meets you in the street fight you, eventually you're going to lose. Like, even if it's to some complete bomb, like some random person who's going to knock you out of nowhere. Like he said, and the reason that was genius was it made me realize he's right. It's not actually about me. Like I can't be so perfect and strong in my mind that nothing affects me. But essentially, if at any random time of the day I just let all these random thoughts in, like eventually someone is going to say the thing that just triggers you. The joke is half the time probably inadvertently, you know what I mean? Like they're just saying some stupid throwaway comment, but that happens to make you think of, like, I'll give you a random example. Like say they hated on your pro career or something. That person, you might even know he's 14 and never saw you play, but it might make you think about, I don't know, some insecurity you had about being a pro, or maybe people didn't respect me the way I should have, or I never got this. All it has to do is trigger that little thing, and then the joke is in your mind at that point in time. It's not even him doing it anymore, is it? So if you notice, that's something as well, actually, we'll tie it into the bigger theme. There's another thing that's very different about CS now. Like, as much as we were talking earlier about like the Olaf boost and how, like, you know, that was where like all the Fnatic players even got hated on by fans, and they even said, like, oh, we thought about retiring stuff. Dude, like, that was nothing compared to now. Like, it feels like it's 10 times the sort of public response when you do something now, and especially any scandal. Like, the obvious one I would bring up right now is that fucking thing with Heroic and Cadian and Hunden and those guys. Dude, there are people who hate on those players to this day, as if they act like they vac cheated or something, you know what I mean? Like, because there's that thing where no one really knows, like, could they know what Hunden was saying? Like, to me, that's like, it's interesting. You know, maybe it does imply something, but dude, people hate on them, like I say, as though they actually got like vac banned or something. Like, they get loads of people hating on them, as far as I can tell.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there were times where they were booed in Copenhagen. Like, that's how ridiculous it might be.
That's wild, isn't it? Yeah.
And in itself, that's why it's kind of, I've always gained respect retroactively, not retroactively, but after the fact, I've gained respect for Heroic for being able to win the hearts of a few fans here and there, and actually create a fan base in Denmark, because their starting point was, we are hated, we're the villains, Astralis are the gods.
Oh, they even cheated against Astralis, was the worst part. So like, in theory, they're going to be hated forever.
Exactly. So that's what I thought. And you're right, this is very, I mean, listen, part of me thinks that in any discipline of that type, which is like sports, there's always going to be a very loud community that is going to judge whatever you're doing, the good and the bad. And when you do bad, they're going to spit on you the way they can. I just think what's special to our environment is that the connection is almost direct. Right? Let's pretend you're LeBron James or you're Messi. Yeah, sure. There's going to be newspaper out there. There's going to be titles that say, oh, fire this guy. He's, oh, wow, paycheck stealer, whatever. We, as people in esports, we spend a whole lot of time on the internet where people around the world have a direct access to us. They can directly talk to you. It's both great because it allows us to exchange and interact with these people, and we can have live shows and stuff like that. But you also, like, the most dangerous aspect of it is that it can really quickly get to you. If I open Twitter and I have 500 notifications of people telling me, "But Maniac, get the fuck out of Titan," that's like, damn, like, it's harder to keep going with whatever it is that you're doing and not think about it. And this was at the time true, and now it's even more, like, in the proportions are much bigger now, because everything is more important, everything is a bigger magnitude, there's more money involved, more viewers watching. Of course, everything has been duplicated or amplified. So yeah, I think pros now have to learn how to deal with that, and talents as well. Like, there is an immediate conduit of communication with the community. It can be used for good and it can be used for bad. And I don't know, what's one of my famous saying is, like, we're not more stupid now than we were before, but in the past you could be stupid on your own. Now you're stupid to the entire world. And so if you're stupid and you're out there in Twitter, you're going to be stupid to the entire world. You broadcast how stupid you are. There's going to be mean people out there. There's going to be people trying to hurt you. But 25 years ago, they would never get to you. But now they have a way. If they want to, if they want to hurt you, they have a way. So we have to learn how to deal with that for sure.
It's like, I often have this thing where I'm not the wittiest guy ever, but it's a pretty good line. I always say it should be called anti-social media for exactly that reason. It's because people just choose to use it in an anti-social manner. Like, as you're saying, like, the real sad conclusion I've come to from Twitter, by the way, it's actually quite a sad thought, because I realized it doesn't even just apply to my haters. It even applies to friends of mine, mate, which is, no human, in my opinion, is supposed to know what everyone else that they know is thinking. I think that's actually that's like one of those, you could almost imagine some sort of like, like a Twilight Zone episode with a genie where someone wishes for that. I just want to know what everyone's thinking at all time. Like, it sounds great. Like, it'd be better for you. No, it'd actually probably drive you mad, because in this scenario, the reason I say it's sad is, like I say, it's not even just the hater. There's even like friends where sometimes you're like, oh, fuck, that's like sort of too much info. I don't really want to know that much about you. Or maybe like, for example, in esports, we would meet and we would never ever talk about, I don't know, politics or something. But now, because I've seen your political opinion, now my brain engages you on that angle, and it's, I think less of you, or I'm alarmed at what your thought is, or I just think it's sad that you think this, X, Y, and Z. Like, sometimes I almost think we do know too much info. By the way,
I know.
Go on, to draw it back in, I thought one thing I would bring up is this. One period I think is mad undervalued in CS history has to be the rise of the Brazilians, the fallen Cold Zero, Fur lineup, etc. Because the thing that I always think is mega misunderstood is, dude, the whole joke, like, they do it recently, so I'll be able to tie it in. Now, one of the reasons why people like Liquid don't really care about being NA anymore is because, like, the practice scene in NA is sort of shit. There aren't tournaments there anymore, etc. In fact, the whole vibe is Europe's where you got to be for Counter-Strike. If people don't know, that was what it was like back then when the Brazilians came along. Back then, you had these teams like, Sean Gares and Cloud9, and, I mean, Daze was already banned at this point in time, but those, like, small group, DAPs, etc. You had this group of people, and if you ever talk to these players, they would just make it like sound impossible to ever be good. They would just be like, we also have to play on like 70 ping, and half the other teams don't even try properly. So there's only two of us, and then now we just know each other too well. And then as they're literally making these complaints, Maniac, a bunch of Brazilian players who aren't even at the top of the world just move in LA to a house, sleep like 3 people in one bed, and just play in the exact same scene and become the best in the world, like the actual best in the world, and totally innovated all of Counter-Strike. And like, again, another team, like, we all play Counter-Strike essentially with the seeds of how they played it in this team. Like, I think that story, like, the joke is the movie wouldn't even have to be them winning the major. Like, the movie's the first part. Like, that's insane. Like, because the thing that always blew my mind was, I'm so impressed that they could find a way to maximize their own ability in an objectively weaker practice scene, because that was always the go-to excuse. And however they did it. Like, if people don't know, they came to Europe for the events, but they were not living in Europe. They were in LA. Most of their time, they were in NA scrimming, and they would just come to the lands. Like, I think that is one of the most impressive feats ever, to become number one from that space, mate.
I agree. I think the speed at which they improved was incredible. Because I remember I was working an event where they lost their first game 16-0. We were it must have been some FaZe finals, probably.
It was FaZe stage 3 at DreamHack Winter 2015.
Exactly. That's the one where they started their campaign by losing 16-0. And I wasn't really too familiar with them at the time. I had played them at ESWC. We had beaten them at ESWC 2015. So I thought, they're decent, but that's going to be it. They're going to be one of the just basically touristy type teams who come in here, get a bit of experience, and then no. They ran it back this entire event, and they had a very honorable finish towards the very end. And at the time, I remember thinking, shit, like this is the turnover we can see in like one event from a team that looked super pedestrian and actually, hold on a minute, can hold it against the most elite teams. And then after this, it didn't really take them a lot of times, like 3-4 events to immediately like become very strong. And there's obviously a huge like romantic aspect to it, like Flusha, which we tie back to what we're talking about, helping them financially to make it to an event, because of course they didn't have the biggest financial sponsors at the time, and it was a huge expense to be able to move from Brazil or from Los Angeles, whatever at the time. There is a whole lot. I think the movie writes itself. And also from a pure Counter-Strike perspective, if you love the game, they very much reinvented how retakes and clutches could be played. Like, they were the first team to use all of the seconds that were allowed to you as a retake is happening, when we were all playing rushy Counter-Strike and we all wanted to go fast and explosive and through smokes. They just realized, wait a minute, we are 3 versus 2 right now. There are 2 smokes in front of us. What if we just waited 20 seconds before we retake? And what if we just gave ourselves 14 seconds instead of 25 to retake, but we know exactly what we're going to do in these 14 seconds, and we're going to win it. And I still remember having to adapt my brain, or my brain having to adapt rather watching them play, because there'd be scenarios where I'm watching the clutch happening and I'm thinking, they're going to lose this. Like, why are they not retaking? What's happening? What are they not doing? And then it would just click, and it would have the perfect pathway, and it would retake the 3v3, and I would just be left thinking, okay, this is actually how you can play it. I didn't know you could play it. I had no idea you could do that. So that was one thing. And the other one was Cold Zera became more perfected version of a happy, which is bait the entire team, but be the absolute best in the world at it. And put yourself in positions where you have to double or triple kill to win the round. But guess what? Deliver it 99% of the time. Like, it was so... I feel like the Coldzera topic created a divide in the community, because one side was thinking, look at this guy, he's always in easy positions. Anybody could do what he was doing. And I was firmly against that vibe, because I saw it as a whole lot of people could be put in that scenario, but 1 out of 1,000 would be able to always capitalize on it. Always, every single time, deliver the right move, the right spray, all of these moments. And it was the consistency of what he was doing in 2016 that really blew my mind. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot from watching. They were probably one of the teams that influenced me the most in terms of like how I think of the game. And for that, they have a special place in the analyst heart that I have now.
Oh, I definitely agree on the Coldzera topic. Like, when people thought that, like, yeah, but if anyone, if someone else got to bait, and other, like, mate, the joke is at the time, like, maybe NiKo, like, there's like 1 or 2 people maybe in the whole world would have any chance with that exact setup of being as good. Because I agree with you. I always say this. Like, he's the player to me that shows me what you mean by the word bait. Like, I think he was baiting correctly. He was doing an awesome job. If you think baiting's negative, then you must think this player's socks is overrated. Like, I think he was mega personally. So, yeah. And the other thing I would say on their team as well is, like, that thing you said about how they would use every second on the clock. One of the craziest things they did, and I think Astralis took this and ran with it years later, was they realized how terrifying it is when you just lurk on the map and there's no agenda that's obvious. So if they're in like a 2v2 or a 3v3, like you say, normally as the other team, you're just thinking objective based. You're thinking, right, either we have to plant the bomb or we have to retake the bomb. What they would do is they would just realize in like a 2v2, actually, if we just like don't move and just sit in these 2 spots, if one of them just peeks like this corner for information, we kill it. It's a 1v2 at that point. Like, we basically won the round without ever like engaging the map. And they were just the best at it. Like, it was like a bad horror movie, dude. You would just watch the other team in the 2v2. Oh, he's gonna get off-angled by some guy who's just waiting for no reason at this box, you know. So it was a nightmare. And then the other thing I'd also say is, this reminds me actually, because I'll invert the concept of Fnatic and Luminosity here. Those 2 teams, I do think, fundamentally showed people like the best way to play the game at that time, and everyone actually was almost a fool if they didn't mimic it and sort of like integrate it. I've always thought part of the genius of why the Astralis era was so dominant is that it was the opposite. It's that everyone did try to copy them, but you couldn't do what they were doing is the problem. Like, in a way, they actually fucked up all their opponents, because, dude, I actually do think, I know Team Liquid especially just outright admit they did, but a whole bunch of, I think NAVI was doing it, a whole bunch of teams was trying to sort of do the things Astralis did, but as a result, it just made you like a worse version of them, and that's exactly what they're comfortable playing against. So, like, a lot of teams thought they could do all that tactical and util shit. Like, I don't know, mate. There's only one team ever truly in history I've ever seen pull that off, and it was Astralis, you know.
But I don't know if you agree, but I feel like this Astralis moment or the Astralis era was probably the first one in which there was one way to play the game. There was one correct way to play the game. Because now we just referenced Fnatic and Luminosity. They were coexisting for a while, like the 2015 into 2016. But they had very opposite ways of playing the game. Like very different rhythms, very different philosophies of how they were approaching it. And then suddenly you have Astralis who finally start winning in 2018, and then, no, that this is their way. If you want to win Counter-Strike, you have to play their way. And so I think a whole lot of people try to play catch-up and lost whatever it was that was making them dangerous in the name of trying to catch up with that playstyle. And then and I think this sort of tunneling of the Counter-Strike has then exploded again. And now we're not in that era anymore. We don't have one way to play the game. There's different teams and different vibes to it. The VPs, the G2s, and you have the Ns, the more tacticals. Like, we're in a very much more diverse horizon than we were in 2018 to 19, where Astralis just said, listen, guys, if you want to win Counter-Strike, this is our way or no way.
I would even say that actually, even though I sort of agree with Richard's sentiment towards the end, I do think some of the top teams were a bit flawed, and sometimes the scene wasn't always as good as it should have been at the top. But the one thing I will say is very positive of what you're saying is there has never been more ways to make a team and play the game than now. In fact, there's another thing we could even bridge into and talk about a little bit briefly, is what a game changer FaZe Clan was. Because to me, the 2 people who actually changed World Counter-Strike culturally to make it like Dota and League now, where it's not about being from one country. It's you just get 5 players that can communicate, try and get the right roles, and then you play Counter-Strike. Like, if you look at the Team Liquid lineup now, that would be inconceivable 4 or 5 years ago. That could ever be a Team Liquid lineup. So the 2 players that did this, in my opinion, are Carrigan and NiKo. Because it's not just that you made FaZe. Remember, there was a FaZe before either of these players. There was a FaZe with Makalele and Scream and Dennis. Like, some of these were good players. Some of them were even very good players. The difference is NiKo and Carrigan are contenders for best ever at their role, and now they're playing in international teams. That's what the Rubicon moment is for me. Because when someone like Carrigan and NiKo are saying, like, I'm just going to have my whole career international, now it's viable for an international team to be the absolute best ever. Like, that's now on the table. As opposed to, if you actually had it how it was 5-6 years ago, I think you would always have teams like a Mouse or, you know, these sorts that's got an OG that would make it international. But you see, it would be that sort of talent. It would be like, you know, it makes you marginally better than your domestic competition, but you're still not going to be like top 5 in the world, probably. Obviously, the Mouse one could yet turn out to be wrong on that one. We'll see. But for me, I think it's actually amazing the impact that FaZe Clan's had. Mix. Think about it, like, they even ended the game like, NiKo's the best player now, arguably, on G2, when the FaZe Clan ended with the last, like, attempted era. Like, actually, it worked. Like, because I tell you what, I don't know what you think, so give me your thoughts from this perspective initially. When they first started making those teams, I remember thinking, oh, maybe this only works when you've got, like, Carrigan. Maybe that's, like, the only lineup. Or, if you're a poor team, I would never, ever, I think I even made videos where I said the opposite. I never thought you would ever have a world where most teams went international. You know that graphic that was shown like maybe 2 months ago? I think it was for Pro League, where it was just like nearly every team's a European flag now. No, yeah, right. They're not. Yeah, right. Almost everyone's European now, or just some mixed teams. So isn't that wild from where we came from? It. What do you think of that? Did you ever think it was possible?
I think I had to adapt. I had to change my perspective on it. What I thought from the get-go was that people probably exaggerated the importance of communication and probably used it as an excuse to justify whatever the hell was happening in the team. And a sad example for that for me would be probably the beginnings of Vitality, for example, where I felt like they were referencing communication a lot in their post-game interviews, explaining, listen, you know what, we are starting this international team now, and it's getting complicated because it turns out, whether it's in your own language or it's in your secondary language, which is going to be English, maybe, just maybe, it amplifies whatever you already are at the basis, which if you are a calm player and you have a clean communication, sure, it's going to be harder to do it in English. There's going to be a couple of moments where maybe the word is missing you, so you don't exactly say what it is that you need to say, and then you lose around here and there. But my take is that it mainly just reflects and amplifies who you already are. So if you're an excited player, if you have a tendency to scream around, you might just do it even more in English. It's not going to change. So I think some people started to realize that this is just what it is. There's a finite amount of words that you use when you play a game of Counter-Strike in English. Like, you're not writing a thesis. This is not philosophy. Like, there are a few key words, and I think very good teams over time have learned to code whatever it is they're doing, so they don't have to do like a 3-sentence to explain what's going to happen. They have a few code words that they use, and then the idea is clear. We were already doing that in Titan in French, so I'm guessing this has still gone on now. And so people have finally started to overcome this mental obstacle, which they imagine to be, communicating in English. That's going to be too hard. We can never do it. This is going to be way too hard. And once people bought into that a little bit more, they started just working on the team and just doing it the way they would do in their own language, just having to clear up a little bit the communication. This is how I see it. I think communication was seen as like this huge Hydra type mythological monster that would eat everybody that was trying to tame it, and now people are starting to realize that they can do it, and FaZe Clan is the reason for that. To a lesser extent, Mouse did that as well. They were one of the first few orgs to have it. I mean, Kerrigan was even in Mouse at the time. He was doing that too. And I agree with you. They proved to everyone that what we thought impossible is actually, in fact, possible. You can have an ER, you can win a Grand Slam, you can win a major, you can win Cologne. So, hey, if we can do it, why can't you?
One of the other, like, there's not that many more teams, obviously, to talk about, so we'll move towards the end of the episode. One thing I will say is, even though when all that, like, conflict stuff broke out in Ukraine, and obviously it's still having rippling effects to this day of who can play in what teams, and obviously how it's impacted those players and what their lives are like and how they feel about the game. The reason also I think it's an insane bomber that it basically cut short that NAVI team's run, as in we can never know, would they already have gone, slightly off the boil, still be really good, or would they have maintained their dominance? Is if people don't know, that team only lost once. They lost that one series to Team Liquid at that like World Finals of Blast at the end of 2021. Aside from that, they won every series and they won all the lands. They won like 4 lands or something. Like, That is sad, because think about how crazy that is. That means their record was something, Maniac, like 20 series won and 1 lost. And then this thing happens, essentially is a black swan event that just changes everything forever. Like, we can never know, for all we know, think about how much time was left. Maybe that Navi team, I know some of them think this, by the way, maybe that was the best team ever to play CS. Who knows, right? Because I have to say, when they would win the game, mate, they were really fucking scary. Like, the firepower was bonkers in that lineup. You remember when Bit was popping off every event? And then, like, the joke was, if Electronic had a good game as well, you couldn't beat them, mate, because they had Simple and Bit. Like, they would, that team actually, at the time, I even had the vibe, but maybe this is the best team ever. Like, fuck, holy fuck.
I mean, I remember working the event with you in Stockholm when we had the first offline major finally after the COVID period, and this was one of the most dominant run I've ever seen at a major. Yes. Like, straight up ridiculous, because it was the combination of both Simple, even for his own standards, reaching like astronomical numbers. I think he ended up with 1.49 rating as a global major rating, which in itself is completely stupid.
Shouldn't be possible at all.
It actually is unrealistic. Anyway, he did that, and on top of that, like, the Counter-Strike they were playing was clean, and they had many different ways to win rounds, and Bit looked like this incredible diamond that just immediately started playing great Counter-Strike on LAN, because his beginnings in Navi a few months back online were very shaky, but then suddenly he shows up in Cologne and you're like, holy fuck, like, this is the level he's going to play now. Okay, and then you have Electronic, who's supposedly your third player. Are you kidding me? Electronic, your third player, like one of the 10 best players we've had in the last 8 years of Counter-Strike. He's your third player? No, I agree. And it's one of these events where I'm always, I mean events, I'm referring to the war in Ukraine. I'm always very careful how I word it, because I know so little about it.
Oh, of course.
And it is a shame. I think it's a very reductive way to look at it and say, oh, I would have wished Navi to stick together, because there's obviously so much more at stake and the lives of millions of people have been completely shattered. I get that. But in the context of Counter-Strike, yes, it is a shame that this Navi team couldn't stick together and that this came in between and possibly, arguably ruin whatever they had, because I don't see who was in a position to beat them. I think everyone was scrambling to find solutions to beat Navi. The joke is that's probably why Vitality went international, because holy shit, like, we cannot beat them. This Navi team is unbeatable. They spank us every single time we meet them. So we're gonna cross this Rubicon, as you mentioned, love the reference, and we're gonna bring Dupree and Magisk. Like, that's how desperate we are to beat Navi. So we can only imagine that this dominance would have lasted longer than what it did. We just don't know for how long.
I mean, the other thing that's obviously ridiculous, because now understandably it can't happen, is I also think if that whole conflict thing hadn't have started, I know technically it had already like softly begun years earlier, like back in like 2014, but it wasn't having an impact on esports is the key thing. The other reason it's so brutal for Navi, in my opinion, is bearing in mind at the time before this conflict broke out, they didn't have a problem having Russian players. They had Boomich, they had Perfecto, they had, in fact, if people don't know, at the time their flag was even Russian on HLTV because they had 3 out of 5 players, and it just wasn't considered a big deal at the time. The other thing that's so sad to me is, dude, they essentially didn't have an opportunity to re-up after that. Like, so they had to have SDY and fucking all Ukrainian players after that. Like, politically, it just wasn't seen as a viable thing to bring in Russian players. But the saddest thing is, there's a seemingly unlimited supply of them right now. Like, every top team, the joke is even people like Team Liquid are recruiting them. Like, everyone knows these are the players that are all available and they've got the talent. So I also think it would have been in past years, it would have been so easy for Navi to pivot, dude. Like, maybe they eventually wanted to replace Boomich anyway. There were players out there in the scene. I mean, think of some of the mega players who play in Cloud9 and people like Jerry. So there were players that would have been an obvious slot in and would almost say yes immediately if you give them the offer. So I think that also massively changed like the outcome of the game and who's number one and all the rest of it. Right. One thing I want to get to though, right, now that CSGO has ended, and now, like I say, for real. Now it's really ended. Like, there's no major, there's no Cologne. In fact, in theory, there's nothing. There's just Blast Showdown at the end of Pro League, right? So now it's safe to say, finally. Dude, the thing that does kill me, I have to say, is NiKo never winning a major. That actually, of all the things, right, I can handle the other ones, Maniac, because here's how I do it, right? When I think of existence, that's actually totally on him. He was unable to get over whatever psychological issue he had. And I also think unfortunately for him, he had this classic problem, like we were talking about the IGLs, which is because his whole shit was basically like, I am more right than all of you, so listen to me. Well, if you're ever not right, that cracks that whole sort of mystique. Like, now suddenly you aren't the genius leader that everyone thought. That pokes a hole in it. So for that one, It sucks. I was a fan of his, but it just didn't happen. It makes sense that it didn't happen in a way if I actually look at the way it played out. Same with the Guardian one. Guardian was playing in fucking NAVI. If people don't know, he's not a fluent Russian speaker. That's not even a language they were speaking in his country. Like, I always thought, dude, it's amazing you can even make the major final. Like, look, yeah, obviously you should have won the one against Cloud9. That goes out saying. But if people remember, Guardian played well in that match. Like, that one, again, it sucks he never won the major, but I can handle it. The NiKo one, I actually can't handle Maniac. Because first of all, that PGL Stockholm one, dude, I think his performance losing at that major was as good as like most of the MVPs of majors I've ever seen. So that one kills me inside. And then secondly, it's the amount of chances he had. Bro, for real, if we go back now, yeah, forget mouse spots. I'm not counting that. He doesn't have to win in mouse. But from the moment he's in FaZe, we're talking like a solid like 9 or 10 majors or something. Like, there's a lot of chances that it never happens. So I do think that will go down as like a tragedy, mate. Like, the idea of this guy, let's be real, he was better than most of the players that won the major. Like, the real joke is the only player I'm actually sure is better than him in Counter-Strike, maybe Simple, that's it. Like, it's actually, I mean, I know he's got a chance in CS2, but I think it's going to be one of the all-time tragedies he'd ever won the CSGO major. This guy was more than good enough.
Yeah, he was more than good enough, but as you said, he also had plenty of opportunities. Like the amount of participations he had, and you can always argue that in some of these rosters, he had probably players dragging him down a little bit. Sure, I think the numbers will probably support that claim, but that's also true for a whole lot of players who, in fact, did win majors and were able to win in spite of whatever weaknesses they had in their roster. And then not only do I consider... Because the way I see NiKo is that the NiKo that we have in the last, I want to say, 1.5 to 2 years, I feel like is way more mature than the one we had before. Like, he's way more complete. And maybe the numbers, in fact, I would say the numbers at the end of this year were crazy, but still, I think he's cleaned up a whole of his mistake. Like, he had a tendency to overplay, put himself way too much in danger, trying to take the game to his own hand way too much. I feel this is a much more interesting and intricate version of NiKo that we have now, much more complete. I love the NiKo now more than I did even when he was in FaZe, even if arguably he was maybe more splashy and it was more impressive. The NiKo that we have now, I love it more. But hey, they fucked up like 2 major cycles where they were not even in a position to be competitive. Like, and then with this very lineup, we're actually on to win Katowice and Cologne. So how do you reconcile these facts? Because you cannot have it both ways.
Yes.
Like, that's the thing. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot just say, well, he's obviously been encumbered with some dead weights who will never live up to his talent. But at the same time, suddenly, magically, this lineup is the same one that helps him lift the double with Katowice and Cologne, which is one of the craziest feats you can do in Counter-Strike. You do it, some of the most important event, most tenure event we have in the scene. So which is it? Does he take responsibility or does he not? You can't have your cake and eat it too. That you cannot have.
Also, you know what I've just realised is actually really gross when you think about it this way, is Cologne and Katowice used to be majors, mate.
I know. I know.
That's actually so evil. It's almost like he did the cursed monkey paw, you know. He got a monkey paw, but in like 2015, and he goes,
I know.
Eventually in my career, I need to win Cologne and Katowice. The monkey paw closes up. He's like, oh, perfect, I'm going to win now. The joke is he only wins when they're not majors anymore. That's
I know.
That's how it gets fucked at the end.
You asked for the wish, but you didn't word it properly. It's like, yeah, I want to win Cologne, Katowice as majors. Like, yeah, but they are not majors anymore. So you did win Katowice and Cologne. You got what you wanted. Give me your soul now. You're going to hell anyway. Oh, shit.
By the way, the one other thing I would say is, this is my last topic. The one other one that I'll never get over is, like, here's the thing. I could even handle when those NAVI lineups didn't win majors. You know, sometimes they're the best. Sometimes they were just like in amongst a bunch of teams. The sad thing is, because I actually did this on a player level, I did an article, I'm going to say in like, let's say like 2017 or something, maybe like 2018. I actually did do an article that was like, you know, top 10 players never to win a major. And the good news I can tell you is, most of the top 10's gone, by the way. They've all won now. It was like Carrigan, Rain, fucking Simple, Electronic. It was all these really great players, Twists, you know, it was all these mega players that were on this list. So luckily, most of them are off the list. But I'll tell you the bad thing. If I had to do like a team list, the obvious one's fucking Team Liquid, isn't it? Because one thing, here's the other problem as well. Here's how narratives work. If Cloud9 just doesn't win that Boston major, then it's okay for Team Liquid never to win, because no NA team's ever won the major. That's fine. But the sad thing is, if a fan looks back now and they didn't watch CSGO, you might actually think that Boston major lineup was the best NA team. It wasn't even close. Like, those 2 Team Liquid lineups, the 2018 and 2019 one, you just look at their body of work. Like, these were really, really good teams. Like, I mean, the joke is they could beat every European team not called Astralis routinely as well. They could make all the finals. They could do anything, Team seemingly. So the idea that not like both those lineups, they couldn't get one major. Like for me, if you just give NiKo a major and you give that Team Liquid team a major, it almost like CS just makes sense at that point in time, if you know what I mean. I know that sounds fucked up and it's mad bias, but that's how I feel almost.
Yeah, I would co-sign that. I think I would co-sign, giving that major to Liquid. It's just the problem is, I think the argument for people who attack that stance is that they argue the length of the domination that Liquid had, like these 63 days, and then the rest of it is only deep runs and not actually winning and always losing to Astralis and never being able to. Now apply that same logic to very games in 2013. Only losing to NIP. What could have been so many trophies.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that's just not how it works. The unfortunate situation is what you mentioned, is that they actually had an NA team win a major, and then which is
that makes them look stupid now, doesn't it? Even though they were better, exactly.
Over time, much better team. That incredible players. I mean, Twist obviously coming out of these ranks now with FaZe, and he goes on to win Grand Slam and Major as well. Yeah, that's...
By the way, I always used to be fair, think the same thing to fucking Existence and Happy. I used to think, imagine being Existence, right? You're sitting there in your team house all day, like some fucking like Oppenheimer level shit. You're just charting out like graphs of like, and then if they come in here, then the double flash comes over, and when we pull off, then we've got to rotate. You're doing all that, right? Meanwhile, you're not winning the major minute. You then have to like tune in, and then there's just like Happy, like, yeah, just do like you forged attack the site, and I'll just bait over here. And then he's just like, and the second major of the year, like... That's gonna kill you inside, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this guy's just doing whatever and he's just winning, and you're just like trying everything you can. That's brutal.
I know. It's just sometimes it's not just about deserving.
Nah, exactly.
That's not how it works in esports.
No, it isn't. And I'll always say this, right? As fucked up as it sounds, because a lot of people can't handle that actually when it's like unfair, when sports aren't fair and all that. It's like, in a way though, that is actually like a feature, not a bug. Like I've always said it this way. It's only because I know how fucking insanely like unfair it feels that NiKo never won a major. That's why when someone like Simple finally wins theirs, it's probably the best feeling ever imaginable, because like you know that like it has a cost when you lose. It isn't just like, no, but well, try again next time. It's like, if you never win one of those, it means something to your career. So the problem is, to have that high, you actually have to also have the other side of it. Obviously, that's like the other side of the mirror. It's why I made that video, if people didn't see it, for the last major. It's on the Last Free Nation channel, that was called Let's Hear It for the Losers. And it was actually about how like people think like only the last place guy's the loser. The guy who comes second to loser, he has to literally for the rest of his career, especially if it's like a major, sit there and think like Guardian must do now that he's like semi-retired. Like, that was my chance. That was my chance, and it fucking, I blew it, or it was taken from me, whatever way around. I can't ever get it back now. That fucking sucks.
And it is cruel and it is unfair, but it's also why I think we should treat every single victory with the respect that it comes with, not just like, oh, this was the logical path and it has happened because they were supposed to win. No, that statement has been true for many different teams in many different eras, and they didn't always win.
No, you're right.
There is no logical path that like an equation that amounts to you winning a major. That just doesn't exist. You have to fucking win it, and when you finally do it, it has to be given the respect. And the more you have suffered before you get there, the more it has value, of course. And so all of these paths that you're talking about, how Simple had to wait for so long, how NiKo never put his hand on it, this is what we use to build the narratives of how important it is to win a major, because there are exceptional players who either had to wait years or never got it.
Yes. And I hope people do get it that it's just a meme now. Like, obviously, Devil Walk winning that first major isn't really in any way relevant to Simple winning or not winning a major. It's not even like, it's like almost a non sequitur at this point in time. It doesn't mean anything. And like, in that context, the only way I could say it like this is like, if we're talking about relative to Simple, you never won a major Devil Walk. If we're talking about you winning a major Devil Walk, then Simple was already better than that years ago. So it's like, that's one of those ones where I hope people are just memeing. I hope they're not actually even like one. They better not even be 1% serious. That has to be like 100% meme. Come on. 100%.
No. It's a meme. We're safe, Duncan.